Her eye snaps open, wide with a sudden, jarring clarity that pierces through the darkness of unconsciousness. Disoriented, she pushes herself up from the cold ground, her gaze darting across the bustling, unfamiliar surroundings of a crowded marketplace. The cacophony of chatter and movement fills her ears as she whispers a question to the air, wondering where she could possibly be. A shadow falls over her as Pakis leans in, his voice gruff and skeptical as he checks if she is still among the living. From the side, a man's voice cuts through the noise, addressing her by a name that feels both foreign and strangely intimate. Frim. The name hangs in the air, sparking a flash of internal panic as she realizes she just uttered a name she has no memory of ever hearing before. Nearby, the boy continues his explanation, noting that the man who called out is the one responsible for maintaining order in this place. He pauses, his expression shifting to one of genuine confusion as he questions the sudden change in her manner of speech, wondering since when she had been able to talk with such clarity and poise. With a dismissive shrug, he suggests that perhaps a recent blow to the head had rattled her brain more than usual. Despite his mockery, a profound realization takes hold within her. She remembers everything up to this point, but the memories belong to a life far removed from this one. The world of dirt and noise fades, replaced by the sterile clarity of a past existence where she was born in Japan. In that life, she had been a researcher, moving through a sequence of days that felt dull and uneventful. She recalls the long hours spent in the quiet hum of the office, surrounded by colleagues, and the steady rhythm of a professional routine that offered little in the way of excitement, yet provided a sense of stable normalcy. One particular afternoon stands out, a day when she had ventured to a department store to purchase sweets for a client, her mind occupied by the mundane details of her errand as she headed back. As she stood on the ascending escalator, clutching her shopping bags, the ordinary flow of time began to fracture, signaled by a small object tumbling through the air just before the memory cuts to black. She was lost in thought, the weight of a mundane, weary life pressing down on her as she descended the escalator in silence. Suddenly, her eyes widened as she spotted a child tumbling over the railing above, falling toward the hard floor below. Without a second thought, she lunged forward, her body moving instinctively to save the boy before her mind could even process the danger. She managed to catch the child in midair, pulling him close to her chest as they both plummeted toward the ground. The impact was sudden and final. Her head struck the ground with a sickening thud, and in that instant, her life in that world came to an abrupt end. As the vision of her death faded, Frim found herself back in the harsh reality of the slums, her head throbbing from the kick Pakis had delivered earlier. She realized with a start that those weren't just dreams, but the final memories of her previous existence surfacing to replace the fragmented thoughts of a simple girl. He looked down at her with his usual impatience, dismissing her dazed state and telling her it was time to get back to their grueling work. As they moved through the streets, the shadow of the local mafia loomed large, particularly the influence of Dogger's sons who enforced the big boss's brutal will across the town. He began shouting to the crowd, trying to hawk their meager supply of water with a desperate energy. Frim watched him, noting how the old version of herself used to rely on this unreliable boy, despite his lack of any truly redeeming qualities. They stood in the heart of the bustling city market, a place where every drop of water was a precious commodity and survival was a daily struggle under the watchful eyes of the criminal underworld. She stands beside Pakis as he hawks their wares, the crowd marveling at the purity of the water she provides. The customers are delighted, noting that the liquid is delicious and refreshing, a stark contrast to the usual supply available in the city. With a focused expression, she summons a stream of clear liquid into a massive jar, noting how Pakis's lack of mathematical understanding leads to some questionable business decisions. He seems to charge the same price regardless of the volume, failing to grasp that a larger container should cost more. After the day's labor, she receives a meager portion of smoky bread, a bit of soup, and 2 small copper coins as her share. It is a humble meal, barely enough to sustain her after the exertion of her magic. She watches as the bulk of their hard-earned money is handed over to their superiors, realizing that no matter how much they sell, the lion's share always vanishes into the hands of the organization. The realization that they are merely tools for someone else's profit weighs heavily on her mind. Later, she huddles alone in the shadows, weeping silently as she is overwhelmed by the sheer cruelty of this new existence. The world feels cold and unforgiving, a place where her only value is what she can produce. Collapsed on the cold ground, her only wish is for the simple security of a roof over her head, a luxury that feels worlds away. The exhaustion of her body is matched only by the weariness of her spirit. As she follows Pakis through the dusty streets the next day, the line between a nightmare and her waking life begins to blur, leaving her feeling like she is barely clinging to survival. She struggles to understand this reality, wondering if she is merely living through a long, dark dream. She contemplates her grim reality, abandoned by her parents and tethered to a criminal syndicate in a world that lacks even the most basic comforts of her previous life. The lack of development in this place, even in its infrastructure, is a constant reminder of how far she has fallen. Despite the hardships, she recognizes the rarity of her gift, noting that while magic is common, The ability to manifest pure, drinkable water is a prized and unusual talent. She is surprised by her own proficiency, realizing that her skill is far more significant than she initially thought. She is given no peace as the boy barks orders at her to stay focused, his desperation driving him to exploit her abilities to their absolute limit. He warns her not to mess around, showing a callous disregard for her well-being in his pursuit of more water to sell. He is not the only one profiting from the girl's labor. Even when the boss shows a rare moment of generosity by sending her pocket money, his superiors are quick to snatch it away for themselves. Because of this constant theft, the girl is left with nothing but exhaustion, slumped beside a massive clay jar while her handler barks orders from the shadows. Despite the grueling work, she finds a small, fleeting joy in the magic itself. Watching the clear water spill from her fingertips, as if it were the only thing in this world she could truly control. This momentary peace is shattered when the boy violently seizes her arm to drag her to the next task, prompting a nearby worker to shout a warning that his cruelty has finally crossed a line. She looks on in horror at the broken form of a man who dared to defy her captor, a grim reminder that the cost of resistance is a brutal beating that leaves one shattered by the following day. With a newfound spark of defiance in her eyes, she realizes that this cycle of misery is unsustainable and that she must find a way to escape this wretched existence. Her body finally betrays her, and she collapses onto the hard ground with a heavy thud, leaving the boy to look down at her with nothing but annoyance as he questions why she can no longer walk. He questions if her lack of strength is due to her meager rations, but when she suggests she might simply need more food to fuel her growing body, he responds with a sharp, stinging smack across her face. The assault continues as he repeatedly kicks her while she lies defenseless on the ground, his face contorted with rage as he screams insults at her, unaware that amidst the pain, she is already formulating a plan to change her fate. A few days have passed since Frim's initial struggle, and the atmosphere in the camp remains one of casual cruelty. The other children mock her survival as they prepare for their daily task, providing water for the organization's leader. Her companion, Pakis, warns her of the strict security surrounding their mission. Because the boss was once poisoned, every offering must be scrutinized before entering his presence, a fact that she realizes makes this her only opportunity to escape. Upon entering the inner sanctum, she is met by the imposing figure of Dogger, who reclines with an air of bored menace. He recalls the quality of the water she provided previously, but his sheer physical presence sends a wave of paralyzing fear through her. He directs her to empty her vessel into a large ceramic jar nearby. As Pakis departs to finish other chores, she is left alone in the room with the giant of a man, the weight of his gaze heavy upon her. Approaching the designated container, she peers inside only to find it coated in a layer of foul, stagnant slime. The neglect is obvious, turning what should be a simple task into a revolting discovery. She hesitates, her voice trembling as she points out the filth to the looming figure. She asks if she should still proceed, her wide eyes looking up at Dogger as his massive shadow completely envelopes her. The leader's expression shifts from boredom to sudden, violent irritation. He demands to know why the jar wasn't cleaned, his voice booming as he turns his attention to Kedin, who stands nearby with a nervous smile. Without further warning, he unleashes a brutal assault on the negligent worker. The room echoes with the sounds of heavy blows as Dogger punishes the man for his failure, demonstrating the terrifying volatility of his temper. The brute finally relents, ordering the broken man to be dragged from his sight. As the heavy doors close, a suffocating silence returns to the room, leaving Frim alone with the source of such mindless violence. Overwhelmed by terror, she begins to stammer out apologies, her body hunched and trembling as she admits her nerves have made it impossible to speak clearly. Dogger looks down at her, his anger momentarily replaced by a flicker of confusion as he questions why she is even apologizing. She trembles as she confesses the truth, her voice small and fragile. The money he had provided for her sustenance was snatched away by the others in the hideout, leaving her with nothing. The boss listens in silence, his expression unreadable as he processes her admission of vulnerability. He simply acknowledges her words with a low, contemplative grunt, the weight of his gaze shifting as he considers the environment he rules. She remains small and bowed, her eyes fixed on the floor as she awaits a reaction that could mean further hardship or a rare moment of mercy. Instead of the anger she feared, he pushes a plate of food toward her, a blunt command to eat. While she tentatively accepts the meal, she fulfills her duty, carefully pouring water into his cup as he watches her every move with a sharp, calculating intensity. Once she finishes the meal, he dismisses her with a curt word of approval, signaling the end of their interaction. From that day forward, the atmosphere in the hideout shifts. The casual cruelty from Pakis and the others ceases, replaced by a wary distance as the boss begins to summon her more frequently. Her daily routine returns to the dusty streets, where she continues to sell water under the watchful, yet now restrained, eye of Pakis. Despite the constant surveillance, she feels a slight shift in her circumstances, a small reprieve from the constant fear that once dominated her existence. During her rounds to restock water at local establishments, she begins to engage with the townspeople, seeking more than just business. At a local pharmacy, a kind woman shares knowledge about medicinal herbs, and she listens intently, absorbing every detail as a potential tool for her future. As she hauls the heavy, ceramic jars through the streets, a new resolve takes root in her mind. She realizes that to escape this life, she must gather information and make herself indispensable, slowly increasing her worth to those who hold her leash until she finds an opening. Back in the dim light of the boss's quarters, she finds herself sharing another meal under his watchful eye. The silence is heavy, and as she swallows her food, the burning desire for freedom flickers in her eyes, a secret she keeps hidden behind her youthful mask of obedience. Seizing a moment of relative calm, she boldly asks if she can assist him in counting the organization's coin. It is a calculated risk, a move to prove her utility beyond simple labor, and she holds her breath as she awaits his reaction to her unexpected offer. The suggestion draws immediate scoffs and insults from the surrounding henchmen, who find the idea of a child handling their gold preposterous. However, the boss silences them with a sharp command, turning his full attention to her to ask if she truly possesses the skill of arithmetic. He watches as the girl contemplates her next move, her mind racing with the realization that securing a vital role is her only path to safety. She knows that within this organization, only the leader manages the complex task of arithmetic, and she must tread with extreme caution if she is to prove her worth. As he presents her with a daunting pile of currency, her initial confidence wavers at the sight of so many unfamiliar coins. Noticing her hesitation, he questions if the task is beyond her, while she silently laments her lack of knowledge regarding the local coinage. Despite her uncertainty, she decides to attempt a new approach, tentatively reaching out to the scattered metal. She explains that there is a specific method she wishes to try, hoping it will be enough to manage the chaos before her. The rhythmic clinking of metal fills the room as she begins the arduous process of counting, her small hands moving with growing purpose. He observes her progress from his seat, offering a gruff warning for her not to exhaust herself with the effort. While she works, memories of former life as a researcher in economics surface, reminding her that understanding the flow of money was once her greatest strength. Even with these ancient, unfamiliar coins, the fundamental principles remain the same, and she focuses intently on sorting them under his watchful, questioning gaze. Once the task is complete, he leans in, curious as to why she has arranged the coins in such a peculiar fashion. She explains her system clearly. The coins have been separated by their physical condition, perfect, normal, and worn, and then meticulously grouped into sets of 10 for easy calculation. She admits that while she couldn't finish everything immediately, organizing them this way will significantly streamline the counting process in the future. Her goal, she states plainly, is to be of genuine assistance to him in managing the organization's wealth. Nearby, Kedden observes the exchange with a skeptical grin, questioning if the girl is truly as useful as she appears. He remains silent for a moment, absorbing the efficiency of her work before simply acknowledging the logic of her method. His curiosity piqued, he demands to know where she acquired such a specific skill, recalling a similar encounter with a child at a market stall long ago. The question sends a wave of nervous energy through her, and she begins to fidget, struggling to find a safe explanation for her expertise. Ultimately, he decides to keep her close, decreeing that she will assist him with these tasks from this point forward. While she celebrates this small victory, her thoughts drift to Pakis and how this change in status might affect their dynamic, unaware that he has already dismissed the boy's relevance to this new arrangement. He leans forward, a stern expression on his face as he issues a sharp warning. He cautions the young girl against the habit of licking her hands after handling the coins, his voice carrying a weight of unexpected concern. Continuing his explanation, he describes how the metal from the currency is detrimental to one's health, warning that an accumulation within the body can eventually turn into a deadly poison. The revelation leaves her reeling, her eyes wide with genuine shock at the hidden danger she had been oblivious to. With the lesson concluded, he formally announces that she will be working directly for him from this day forward. She accepts the position with a crisp, dutiful affirmation, though privately she wonders if she has stepped into a nest of vipers. Regardless, the prospect of this new life is far more appealing than another day spent under Pakis's thumb. The sheer joy of her new circumstances erupts as she leaps into the air, her voice echoing through the hallway with the jubilant realization that she finally has a room of her own. Moments later, he turns his attention back to her previous life of labor, inquiring about the daily wages she received. She barely hears the question at first, her mind still reeling with the relief that she will no longer have to endure the freezing rain to earn her keep. She answers honestly, stating that her pay was a mere 2 copper coins, a figure that causes his expression to darken. He realizes immediately that the amount doesn't align with his official records, concluding that the boys in charge of the water distribution have been pocketing a significant portion of the profit for themselves. He offers a gruff apology for the actions of those he considers his sons, informing her that her days of wandering the streets are over. From now on, the customers will come to them, a change that makes her realize she is being kept close to the center of his operations. Instead of feeling trapped, she is filled with a renewed sense of purpose, viewing this proximity as the perfect chance to prove her worth and become indispensable to her new employer. Eager to demonstrate her value, she asks if there are any other chores she can assist with, and he gives her his indifferent permission to do as she pleases. With a grateful shout, she dashes away, her mind already focused on a problem that has been bothering her since she first arrived. She finds herself staring at the stairs leading to the facilities, noting how the rain has turned the area into a muddy, treacherous mess. Looking at the filth that has accumulated in the toilets, she takes a steadying breath, preparing herself to tackle the grime and make the space habitable once more. She calls forth the water, commanding it to emerge with high pressure to scour the filth away. However, the sudden surge is more forceful than she anticipated, sending her tumbling backward as the torrent sweeps through the corridor. Picking herself up, she realizes that while the power is there, she needs to fine-tune her control to avoid such mishaps in the future. As she works, Dogger approaches, calling out for her. He stops short, his expression shifting to one of pure shock as he takes in the sight of the transformed hallway. Seeing him, she excitedly calls out to the boss, announcing that she has finished cleaning both the hallway and the toilets. The surrounding men are left in a state of shock, staring at the sparkling environment that was once a den of filth. Impressed by her initiative, Dogger gives her a firm pat on the head, praising her efforts and promising her a substantial meal as a reward. While the other men clamor for her to clean their areas next, she beams with joy, her resolve hardening to do whatever is necessary to remain indispensable and far from danger. With a bright smile, she makes a silent vow to herself. She will use every bit of knowledge from her past life to ensure her survival in this harsh new world. Dogger contemplates the strange child and his crew, noting her proficiency with water magic and her unusual knowledge, far beyond what a girl her age should possess. Her unique, pale hair further distinguishes her, confirming his instinct that there was more to her than met the eye when he first recruited her. He then questions when the girl was assigned to Pakis' charge. While Pakis looks on in confusion, the boss recalls his own decree that the next new recruit will be placed under the boy's supervision. Within the quiet of the office, Morga observes that the girl has proven to be an excellent acquisition. Dogger, though seemingly dismissive of his own foresight, listens as the conversation shifts toward the organization's current affairs. Their discussion is interrupted when Kedden approaches with a respectful greeting. He leans in to report a troubling trend. The crowds at their gambling house have been noticeably thinning lately. He continues, identifying the source of the problem as a rival named Lookats, who has opened a competing establishment and is successfully drawing away their regular clientele. Dogger strokes his chin, absorbing the news of this threat to their revenue. The leader suddenly turns his gaze toward Frim, asking if she has any suggestions to remedy the situation. Caught off guard, she frantically searches her memories of a past life for any relevant knowledge, though she realizes she has never actually stepped foot inside a gambling den. She stammers out an apology, admitting her complete lack of experience with such places. Surprised by her sheltered background, Dogger lets out a weary sigh and instructs Morga to take the girl on a tour of their facilities, leaving her confused about the nature of her impending work. He leans forward, emphasizing that he is counting on her fresh perspective to bring something new to the table. He makes it clear that her primary duty is to follow his orders without question, as Kedden prepares to lead her away. The young girl follows, her mind racing with apprehension. She recalls that even in her previous life, she had no interest in gambling, and she wonders with growing dread what truly goes on within the walls of such an establishment. She is soon met with a horrific sight as they enter the gambling house, which is revealed to be a massive, bloodstained arena. The air is thick with the roar of a bloodthirsty crowd as they watch a brutal struggle unfold within a caged pit, leaving her paralyzed with shock. She watched in horror as the realization dawned on her. The combatants were wearing collars. They weren't just fighters. They were slaves being forced to kill one another with cold steel for the amusement of the crowd. The brutality of the spectacle made her question how such a thing could even be legal in this world. She looked down at her hands, the memory of the coins she had been sorting flashing before her eyes. Every piece of gold had been stained by the blood of those who died for entertainment. It was a sickening revelation that she had been a part of this machinery, and she cursed her own blindness for taking so long to see the truth. The realization deepened into a cold, hard fact that chilled her to the bone. Every meal she had eaten and every comfort she had enjoyed since arriving here had been bought and paid for with the lives of the men dying in the pits below. The weight of this truth was physically revolting, making her stomach churn with a sudden, violent nausea. She realized with a jolt of terror that one misstep could easily land her in those same chains, fighting for her life. Moving through the crowded, foul-smelling corridors, she tried to navigate the press of rough, coughing men. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and sickness, and she knew she had to see more of this place to understand the full scale of the horror. As she walked down the dimly lit corridor, the weight of her naivety pressed heavily upon her. She had arrived in this world hoping to use her past knowledge and magic to help people, but the reality was far more grotesque than she had ever imagined. She wondered how she could possibly look the other way now that the veil had been lifted. Her heart sank as she looked down, feeling incredibly shallow for her previous optimism. The reality of this place was far crueler than any nightmare she could have conjured, and she felt a profound sense of sorrow for those she was currently powerless to save. Despite the crushing guilt, she knew she couldn't help everyone immediately. She resolved to carry out the boss's request for the time being, hoping that by gaining influence, she might eventually find a way to change the system from within. With a steadying breath, she asked to be shown where the slaves were being managed. Her path was soon crossed by a familiar face in the hallway. The young boy stopped in his tracks, his eyes widening in surprise as he found her wandering so deep into the dark heart of the complex. He looked at her with curiosity, wondering what business a girl like her had in such a place. She kept her composure, explaining that she was simply performing a task for the boss today, hiding the turmoil that still churned within her. She explains her presence to the young boy, Pakis, noting that the boss is looking for fresh perspectives on the slave market and gambling house operations. Pakis acknowledges the logic, noting the boss's preference for traditional methods and questioning if she is truly here alone. He warns her to be careful, suggesting the environment isn't safe for someone of her stature. She counters by mentioning she was previously under Chief Morga's supervision, though the man had unfortunately succumbed to a drunken slumber, leaving her to explore on her own. He laughs at the mention of the chief's habits, but reiterates his warning, chillingly suggesting that the captives might see her as a meal. She swallows hard as the sounds of rattling bars and manic laughter echo from the shadows, the reality of the place beginning to sink in. She moves deeper into the corridor, where desperate hands reach through the iron grates, their owners reduced to shadows of humanity. A wave of profound sadness and horror washes over her as she questions why these people must endure such a wretched existence. A massive figure suddenly looms over her, causing her to recoil in a sudden panic. The man quickly tries to soothe her, his voice low and steady as he promises he means no harm, urging her to calm down. He introduces himself as Logan, the manager of the slaves in this sector, hoping his appearance hasn't frightened her too much. Finding her courage, she introduces herself as Frim and explains she is acting on the boss's authority, requesting a moment of his time to talk. She elaborates on her situation, explaining how her tour with Chief Morga was cut short by his intoxication. Logan listens patiently, nodding as if the chief's behavior is a well-known and expected occurrence within these walls. He gestures toward a seat and invites her to rest for a moment rather than just standing there. She accepts the offer with a polite word of thanks, feeling a slight shift in the atmosphere as the large man shows an unexpected kindness. She settles in, but quickly notices something peculiar about the way the large man positions himself. He doesn't take a chair for himself, instead remaining on the floor in a subservient posture that feels out of place for a manager. The realization hits her with the force of a physical blow when she sees the heavy metal band encircling his throat. Despite his position of authority over the others, he too is bound by the same chains of enslavement, a mere tool of the organization. She realizes the harsh reality of the hierarchy. Despite her young age, her position under the boss places her above Logan, a man who is technically a slave. This power dynamic prevents them from ever being treated as equals, a fact that weighs heavily on her heart. Overwhelmed by the weight of this realization and the suffering she has witnessed, the young girl begins to weep openly. Logan watches her, his expression filled with a helpless sort of concern as he witnesses her distress. The tears continue to fall as she realizes that her very presence, intended to help, might actually be making Logan's difficult life even harder. He reaches out, pleading with her to stop, his own voice thick with emotion as he tries to comfort her. Wiping her eyes and regaining her composure, she offers a quiet apology for her outburst. She then turns to him with a serious request, asking him to teach her the harsh rules and common sense that govern this underworld so she can navigate it effectively. As she walks away from the slave quarters, her mind wanders back to the horrors she saw in the gambling house. The hunger, the disease, and the casual violence. She understands now that this misery is the standard for everyone here, but she possesses a unique opportunity to change it. The weight of responsibility presses down on her as she envisions the countless lives being lost with every passing second of her hesitation. The imagery of the fallen serves as a grim reminder of the cost of inaction in this brutal place. Stopping outside a heavy wooden door to catch her breath, she is haunted by the thought that even someone as kind as Logan could eventually be consumed by this cruel system if nothing changes. She presses her hand against the wall, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. She refuses to turn a blind eye to the suffering around her any longer, no matter the risk. Returning to the main hall, she finds the boss and his chief advisor waiting for her. When questioned if her tour provided any inspiration, she confirms with a newfound sense of purpose that startles them. With a look of fierce determination in her eyes, she declares her intent to save every life within her reach, having finally conceived a plan to challenge the status quo of the organization. She stood in the dim light of the corridor, her mind racing with the weight of the dual task she had been given. Not only did she need to devise a fresh, viable gambling concept for the organization, but she was also determined to find a way to alleviate the brutal living conditions of the slaves. Her proposal had clearly made an impression, as the massive leader looked on with a rare expression of genuine intrigue. He admitted that it was difficult to fathom such a sophisticated idea coming from a child, yet met every one of his strict criteria perfectly. The concept was a brutal, high-energy spectacle they called boxing, where combatants traded flashy, powerful blows to ignite the crowd's fervor. It was unlike anything the gambling house had ever hosted before, turning raw violence into a structured, captivating performance. By weaving together the thrill of competition with the high stakes of wagering, she had transformed the very nature of the house's business. She felt a flicker of relief that her suggestion had been accepted, hoping that this new system would serve her hidden agenda. The boss acknowledged her success, noting that the new setup meant the slaves were no longer discarded and killed immediately after a single loss. Encouraged by this small victory, she pressed further, suggesting that cleaning the gambling house itself will be the next logical step to improve the environment. He pondered the suggestion, his hand moving to his chin as he realized the practical benefits of a cleaner establishment. It would likely attract a more refined, hygiene-conscious clientele who would speak well of the venue, finally addressing a concern that had been lingering in the back of his mind. She quickly added that healthy, well-kept slaves would also fetch a higher price if the organization ever decided to sell them. However, the giant's skepticism flared as he questioned whether the comfort of such lowly property truly mattered, causing her to tense up and clench her dress in silent anxiety. Despite his doubts, he found a certain dark humor in the prospect of watching the weaker, scrawnier slaves perform menial cleaning duties. He looked down at her, his gaze calculating as he weighed the entertainment value against the effort required. Ultimately, he granted her permission to oversee the cleaning efforts whenever she found the time, leaving the logistics entirely in her hands. While she knew the gambling house remained a place of suffering, she felt a profound sense of relief that she had managed to make their lives even a fraction more bearable. His tone suddenly sharpened as he warned her that if any slave became too talkative during their work, she was to execute them without hesitation. The cold threat left her trembling with fear, but before she could react, he casually mentioned he had something for her and instructed her to visit his quarters later. She stared in wide-eyed wonder as a heavy, leather-bound volume was placed before her, the weight of it thudding against the table. She listened quietly as Dogger explained that the book was her reward, a water magic grimoire he had intended to sell, but decided to give to her instead, though he remained skeptical of its actual utility. She realized with a start that although the characters were unfamiliar, she could read them perfectly well, and she offered her sincere thanks to the man for the unexpected gift. The young girl wondered where the original inhabitant of his body could have learned such things, noting that the previous Frim must have been quite dedicated to her studies. As she clutched the book, the other men in the room voiced their jealousy, prompting Dogger to bark at them to follow her example if they wanted to earn their own keep, while Frim felt a sharp sting of a headache beginning to form. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, she pored over the pages, discovering that the text delved deeply into the intricate mechanics of water magic. She struggled with the dense and difficult text, learning that magic was essentially the result of spirits responding to a caster's internal power, a concept that felt both alien and fascinating. The girl focused on the core concept of visualization, understanding that channeling the magic within her body and matching it to the right attributes was the key to success. With a surge of effort and intense concentration, she attempted to manifest her power, causing a sudden, violent splash of water to erupt into the air. The liquid coalesced into a sharp, projectile-like shape, hovering momentarily as a testament to her first successful step into the world of magic. She stares at the shimmering liquid in her palm, marveling at its simple yet essential nature. While it is the foundation of life, she realizes its limitations as a tool for recording her thoughts, noting that one cannot exactly write with water. Shifting her focus, Frim considers more practical applications for her burgeoning power. The need for cleanliness comes to mind, prompting her to wonder if her magic can be refined into something truly functional. With a sharp cry, she attempts to manifest alkaline electrolyzed water, a flash of light accompanying her effort. However, as the small orb wobbles before her, she finds it impossible to distinguish from ordinary water by sight alone. Undeterred, she theorizes that any combination of hydrogen and oxygen should be within her reach. She decides to push the boundaries of her visualization, calling forth a more complex molecular structure, ozone. She suddenly chokes as the air thickens with a sharp, metallic scent. A violent coughing fit seizes her, proving that manipulating chemical compounds is far more perilous than she anticipated. Gasping for breath, she slowly recovers from the physical shock of her experiment. The realization that she successfully conjured a substance usually reserved for industrial machinery leaves her both shaken and impressed. Standing in the quiet aftermath, she reflects on the inherent danger of her discovery. The toxicity of the ozone weighs heavily on her mind, leaving her to wonder if she has strayed into territory too hazardous to explore. Her heart continues to race, a lingering effect of the near disaster. Seeking to steady her nerves, she walks past the other members toward the common area for a meal. Upon reaching the table, she is greeted by the imposing figure of the boss, who immediately notices her unsettled appearance and asks what is wrong. She quickly masks her anxiety, claiming a simple hunger to which he responds by telling her to eat whatever she likes. As she eats, she informs Dogger of her progress with a new spell, keeping the specifics of her dangerous experiment to herself. Despite his fearsome reputation, she finds herself reflecting on the strange, growing proximity between them. She tries to explain the nature of the substance she created, settling on the word poison to describe the ozone. Dogger listens intently, his brow furrowed as he processes the idea that this magic can remove bad odors and purify the air, though he remains wary of its toxic potential. The young girl leans in with a wide, eager grin, insisting that it is simply the power of magic and demanding praise for her achievement. He can only offer a stunned, slightly overwhelmed response to her sudden burst of energy. She reflects privately on the impossibility of explaining the scientific concept of ozone in this world, realizing she had to resort to the strangest possible explanation. Despite his confusion, the large man acknowledges her hard work, admitting he doesn't quite grasp the details but is impressed nonetheless. He reaches out, his massive hand landing gently on her head in a rhythmic pat that leaves her momentarily stunned. While he commends her for being a good subordinate, he warns her to remember the feeling of the substance so she can detect it in the air, ensuring she doesn't accidentally poison herself or others. The conversation shifts as he draws a connection between the poison of bad smells and the need for a thorough scrubbing of their headquarters. He decides then and there that the lingering stench of the gambling house is a problem that requires immediate action, much to her surprise. With a sudden, booming roar that echoes through the halls, the leader commands his men to prepare for a total cleaning of the establishment the moment the gambling house closes for the day. His intensity is palpable, leaving those nearby startled by the sudden directive. She watches in bewilderment as the atmosphere shifts from magical experimentation to a frantic cleaning spree, though she quickly realizes this unexpected turn of events might actually work in her favor. Around her, the men begin to scramble, grabbing brooms and buckets as the order takes hold. The entire building becomes a whirlwind of activity as the men scrub floors and wipe down surfaces with a desperate energy, driven by their leader's relentless shouting for perfection. He looms over them, demanding they give it their all and leave no corner untouched. Amidst the chaos, she approaches him to discuss the final area that needs attention, the quarters where the slaves reside. He considers her request for a moment before nodding, deciding to entrust that specific task entirely to her. She then tentatively asks if Logan can accompany her, explaining that her small stature might prevent the others from taking her seriously if she goes alone. He turns his gaze toward the large, silent man, considering the logic of her request. She walks through the corridors, her mind racing with the scale of the task ahead. She wonders just how much the foul stench had affected the boss, given how overwhelmed he seemed. It was clear that a single day wouldn't be enough to purge the entire facility of its poison. Despite the daunting nature of the job, she finds comfort in the authority she's been granted. She reminds herself that she has full permission to manage the slave quarters however she deems necessary, a crucial step in her plan. Arriving at the grim, barred cells of the quarters, she finds Logan waiting for her. She offers a respectful bow, expressing her sincere hope for a productive partnership in the hours to come. The man, however, quickly insists that such formalities are unnecessary for someone of her standing. Frim accepts this with a nod and asks if he would be willing to help her coordinate the rest of the workers. He agrees to assist, though he warns her that the others are confused and uncertain about their new instructions. He promises to keep a close watch on the situation to ensure everything proceeds smoothly. Turning to the gathered crowd, she raises her voice with newfound confidence, announcing that everyone is to begin bathing immediately. While the workers murmur in confusion about whether such a thing is even allowed, she begins the process by filling a large wooden bucket with water. As she stares into the cold liquid, a thought occurs to her. The experience would be far more pleasant if the water weren't so frigid. She wonders if her control over the elements extends to manipulating its temperature. Deciding to test her limits, she thrusts her hand forward, commanding the water to become warm. A bright flash of light erupts from her palm as she pours her intent into the spell. To her delight, steam begins to rise from the bucket, carrying the unmistakable heat of a fresh bath. The success of the magic brings a bright smile to her face, confirming her growing mastery. But the triumph is short-lived as a sudden wave of exhaustion washes over her, making the world tilt and blur. As her legs give way and she begins to collapse, Logan cries out in alarm, reaching out to catch her. The memory of the boy from before lingers in her mind. She is visibly relieved to see him safe, expressing her joy that he managed to make it through their ordeal. He, however, remains guarded, clutching a ball as he bluntly asks why she bothered to save him in the first place. The vision fades as she bolts upright in bed, the morning light streaming through a nearby window. It was nothing more than a dream, a fragment of a past life or a recent trauma. A heavy metallic clank echoes through the room as the boss enters, his presence filling the doorway. He notes her awakening with a gruff tone, mentioning that she had passed out after attempting a new spell and that her collapse had sent Logan into a panic. She immediately begins to plead with him, her voice trembling as she takes full responsibility for the incident. She begs him not to punish the other slaves for her own failings. He sighs, scratching his head in mild annoyance before ordering her to remain in her room for the rest of the day to recover. She sits huddled under the covers, stunned that her body had actually given out on her. Once alone, she attempts to practice her magic again, frustrated by her limitations. While she can easily heat water, the ability to create ice remains elusive, leaving her to wonder if she needs to visualize the process differently. After drifting back into a light slumber, she wakes to find a tray of food waiting for her. The realization that the boss himself might have left it there fills her with a confusing mix of surprise and uncertainty. Later, she finds the large man who had been so worried and bows deeply, her voice sincere as she apologizes for the distress her collapse caused him. He looks down at her, his rugged face softening as he expresses how much her sudden illness had startled him. She beams back, full of renewed energy and insisting that she's ready to get back to her cleaning duties. He gently takes her hands, his voice thick with a mixture of gratitude and genuine worry. He explains that while they're all thankful for her help, her well-being is their primary concern, as they don't know what would happen to them if she were to fall ill again. His expression turns grim as he warns her that their very lives might be at stake if she pushes herself too far, suggesting they might literally lose their heads. Frim, looking small but determined, offers a sincere apology and promises to be much more careful with her magical output. She reassures him that producing room-temperature water is no strain at all, offering to provide as much as the group needs as long as it isn't heated. He watches her with a lingering sense of disbelief, still processing the sheer scale of her utility to their captors. He finds it truly incredible, questioning if she has formed a contract with a powerful spirit to manifest such quantities of water. She simply shakes her head, admitting that while she doesn't know why, the water comes to her naturally, though she hasn't made any such pact. She spends the rest of the day in a flurry of activity, using her magic to assist with the heavy cleaning and ensuring everyone has the water they need for their chores. She pauses to wipe the perspiration from her forehead, a small sense of accomplishment warming her despite the exhaustion. She even manages to prepare a bucket of steaming water for the big man, suggesting he share it with the others who have worked particularly hard today. He accepts the gift with a nod of appreciation, deciding it is finally time to end their labors for the evening. He is not the only one thinking of rest, as she watches him walk away while quietly longing for a proper bath of her own. Nearby, the sharp-eyed Morga observes the exchange in silence, his expression unreadable as he tracks her every move. His cold gaze is not the only one she feels, as the presence of so many unfamiliar faces makes her feel small and vulnerable. Her unease is momentarily broken when she encounters the friendly face of Kedin, who stops to ask how her magic training has been progressing. He waits for her response, as she offers him a polite, weary smile, thanking him for his concern before asking if it would be all right for her to continue with her practice and cleaning duties. He seems pleased by her dedication, unaware of the internal struggle she faces. She cheers with joy as Kedin grants her leave to go ahead with her plans for the day. Moments later, the young girl finds herself atop the high stone battlements, observing that the area seems deserted and free from prying eyes. Satisfied with the seclusion, she looks down at the ground far below, confirming that no one is likely to pass through this remote section of the wall. Standing before a flickering torch, the former researcher recalls her past life's experiments with ozone and reasons that she should be able to manipulate the fundamental elements that constitute water. She begins her trial by attempting to manifest oxygen to fuel the nearby flame, hoping the visual aid will help her focus her magical intent. However, as she tries to force both oxygen and hydrogen to emerge simultaneously, the volatile mixture fails to produce the desired result, leading to a frustrated outburst as she realizes the complexity of the task. After the initial shock, the exhausted girl sits back to contemplate the dangers of experimenting with explosive gases and wonders if the wind or the specific ratios of the elements are to blame, drawing on her memories of rocket science. Deciding on a safer path, she shifts her focus toward defensive magic, visualizing the formation of a protective shield made entirely of water. With a surge of concentration, the young mage successfully manifests a dual formation, a shimmering water shield in one hand and a solid water rod containing trapped oxygen in the other. She examines her creation, finding that the water rod is surprisingly firm to the touch, though the effort of maintaining such a complex structure is far more taxing than she had anticipated. She continues her practice, finding that while basic forms come naturally, intricate designs still require intense focus. She manages to manifest small, fluid avian shapes that flutter briefly before dissolving into mist. Reaching out instinctively, she is startled by the tactile reality of her own creation as it brushes against her palm, a testament to her growing control. This physical contact sparks a new idea. She realizes that to prevent the oxygen from simply dissipating into the air, she must provide a more rigid structural containment for the gases. Concentrating her will, she successfully binds the elemental gases within a pressurized aqueous shell, marveling at the stability of the shimmering orb as it emerges from her hands. With a target in sight, she hurls the sphere with all her might, watching it streak through the air toward a distant wooden post. The impact is far more violent than anticipated, resulting in a deafening blast that rocks the very foundations of the wall. As the echoes fade, a thick plume of smoke rises from the wreckage, leaving her breathless and trembling from the sheer scale of the destruction. Peering over the edge, she is horrified to see a gathering of men below, recognizing them from Morga's sketches as members of the rival Lookat's mafia. She realizes with a jolt of fear that something she dropped has fallen right into their midst in the back alley. Panic sets in as the men below shout in confusion, believing themselves to be under a coordinated assault, forcing her to scramble behind a stack of crates for cover. Realizing the gravity of the situation and the risk of an all-out conflict, she knows she must immediately inform her leader of the accidental provocation. She slips away quietly, her mind racing with the need to report the incident to the boss before the situation spirals further out of control. She dashes through the hallway, nearly colliding with Dogger and his men as they prepare to head out. Breathless, she calls out to the boss, who simply tells her to find a safe place to hide while they handle the disturbance outside. The men laugh, dismissing her as a mere child who should stay in her room and play while they wrap things up. Once alone, she retreats into her thoughts, her mind drifting back to her previous life as a researcher. She considers the possibility that her accidental explosion was a blessing in disguise, having perhaps preemptively disrupted an enemy strike before they could launch their own attack. However, the weight of her secret begins to crush her, and she lets out a silent, internal scream of terror. The realization that her ability to create explosions could lead to unimaginable consequences if discovered sends her into a spiral of panic. Her imagination runs wild, picturing the boss and his enforcers looming over her like monsters. She fears that if they ever learned the little hamster they kept around possessed such destructive power, they would stop seeing her as a person and instead transform her into a living weapon. The tension is broken when the men return from the skirmish, boisterous and triumphant after teaching the Lookat's group a lesson they won't soon forget. She quickly moves among them, offering water to the thirsty warriors as they boast about their individual feats of gallantry, with one man wishing she had been there to see his bravery, while another tells him to calm down. Amidst this celebration, Dogger turns his attention toward her, checking to see if she is all right after the commotion. He notes that she was supposed to be off practicing her magic, and asks pointedly if anything unusual occurred during her session, causing her to break into a nervous sweat as she tries to play off the explosion as nothing. A wave of relief washes over her when he decides not to press the issue, though the fear remains rooted in her heart. She can't help but envision a dark future where the boss discovers her offensive capabilities and drags her along to raid enemy turf, using her as a tool for conquest. Desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere, she announces her departure and scurries toward the door. She resolves to keep her mouth shut, believing that silence is her only protection against becoming the very thing she fears. As she leaves, the boss watches her go, a faint, knowing smile playing across his lips. His expression suggests a level of perception that far exceeds what he chooses to reveal, leaving the true extent of his knowledge a mystery. Frim is busy assisting the men with their inventory, her presence a bright spot in the otherwise rough environment. Kedden expresses his sincere gratitude, calling her a lifesaver for her exceptional organizational skills. She humbly brushes off the praise, though she's clearly happy to be of use to the group. As she finishes her tasks, she reflects on the kindness of the former soldiers, realizing she couldn't have managed the workload without their support. She finds herself imagining a peaceful future for Dogger, picturing him as a refined gentleman enjoying a quiet moment at a cafe with a loyal dog by his side. With a smile, she decides it is time to return to the boss and finalize the accounts. Upon entering the office, she is greeted by Dogger, who is not alone. He calls her over, mentioning that there is a specific individual he wants her to meet, a man he describes as a certain noble. The news catches her off guard, as she didn't expect to encounter high society in such a place. Overwhelmed by the sudden mention of nobility, she immediately drops to her knees, keeping her eyes averted as she was taught to do in the presence of status. Dogger, however, finds her formal reaction amusing and pulls her back to her feet, telling her there is no need for such theatrics and that she should just relax. As she looks up, she is met with a face that is startlingly familiar, yet subtly different. The man before her possesses the same strong features as her boss, but carries himself with a polished, aristocratic air that contrasts with the rough edges of the underworld. Her jaw drops in pure confusion, her eyes darting between the two men as she tries to make sense of the situation. The newcomer lets out a hearty laugh, teasing Dogger for not warning the girl about their striking resemblance. The mystery is solved when the man introduces himself as Varsal Drajan, explaining that he is Dogger's brother. Frim can hardly believe her eyes. They're identical twins, and Varsal even reveals that he was the one she had actually helped with the accounting once before. He confirms his identity with a boisterous laugh, clearly enjoying her utter disbelief. She, however, remains skeptical, her mind struggling to reconcile the image of her rough boss with this refined, laughing noble. Dogger steps in to calm her, acknowledging that the revelation is a lot to take in and that his brother can be a bit much. He watches her with a slight smirk, knowing full well how much the resemblance and the sudden appearance of a noble relative has rattled her. Taking advantage of her stunned silence, The noble leans in with a proposal. As they sit together in the office, he suggests that she come to work with him for a while, leaving Frim even more bewildered than before by this unexpected turn of events. He outlines the new assignment, informing her that her primary duty will be to clean the statues belonging to the Trajan family, a task that seems simple yet carries significant weight. She hesitates, her mind racing with the fear that any accidental damage to the noble family's property would lead to severe punishment. But he encourages her to speak her mind freely. She explains that her water magic might be too difficult to control indoors, potentially causing a mess or damaging the surroundings, but he simply chuckles and tells her to do her best, dismissing her worries. He goes on to explain that his brother, Varsal, is a robed noble who acts as a mayor for the region, a revelation that leaves her stunned by the family's high standing and influence. He then shares a more personal truth, explaining that because twins are considered a bad omen in their lineage, he was the one cast out while his brother remained in the family's good graces. She curiously asks why he was the one chosen to be exiled if they are identical, causing him to flinch momentarily before he hides his reaction behind a long drink. Realizing she may have overstepped, she quickly offers an apology. He continues his story with a touch of melancholy, noting that while his brother possesses the earth magic required to build cities, he himself was born without any such innate power. Despite this lack of innate talent, he proudly declares that he has carved out his own path by learning empowering magic, relying on his own strength and fists to survive and prosper. He gestures toward his surroundings, mentioning that he has found good subordinates to stand by him, while she struggles to keep up with the strong drink he has provided as a treat from his brother. She eventually succumbs to the effects of the day's heavy revelations and the potent beverage, looking completely worn out and dazed. She struggles to maintain her footing, the world tilting and blurring around her as the effects of the drink take hold. A firm hand steadies her, and she is hoisted upward, her senses reeling in the sudden movement. Because she is in no state to travel solo, Dogger decides she will be escorted, assigning the massive Logan and a silent warrior named Almaroy to her side for the upcoming journey. This new companion, Almaroy, is a combat slave of mixed heritage, his sharp gaze fixed on her with a cold, predatory intensity that she vaguely recalls from their earlier encounter. Turning his attention to the young boy, Dogger commands Pakis to follow her lead, a directive that clearly irritates the youth, while Logan interjects with a practical concern regarding their destination. He points out that their destination may have areas restricted to women, making it necessary to include a female member in their small party to ensure they can navigate all locations. Grateful for the foresight, she offers her thanks to the giant, and Dogger grants her the freedom to select a couple of women from their ranks to join the mission. As Logan carries her away, Pakis's resentment boils over into a whispered curse, his hostility a sharp contrast to the giant's steady and supportive presence. Ignoring the boy's venom, Logan recommends a fierce combat slave named Makia, though the girl remains preoccupied with Pakis's inexplicable and mounting aggression toward her. Seeking further input, Dogger asks Almaroy if he has any specific candidates in mind for the task ahead, looking for a well-rounded team for the girl's protection. He mentions the possibility that a certain individual might have already been sold off, a casual remark about human commerce that leaves her reeling with shock as they prepare to depart. She watches as two new faces join the group. Makia, a woman of impressive physical stature who introduces herself with boisterous energy, and Talarine, a polite young boy whose appearance causes a visible shock of recognition in Almaroy. Dogger commands the young boy to join the work detail, ignoring the silent, intense gaze of Almaroy, who seems paralyzed by the unexpected encounter. As they prepare to move, the young Talarine stands beside her, his expression unreadable but heavy with the weight of their shared situation. The group soon arrives at a grand, multi-story mansion, a stark contrast to the gritty world they usually inhabit. He greets the children warmly, expressing his anticipation for her arrival and noting the presence of Pakis as well. Leading them to a collection of statues, he explains that there are roughly 60 figures representing the nation's nobility that require attention. Frim questions if she is allowed to destroy any of them, to which Varsal nonchalantly agrees, noting their low value while warning her about the fragile nature of the stone. After asking him to keep his distance, she unleashes a powerful, controlled stream of water, leaving the nobleman in absolute awe of her magical prowess. She fixes him with a piercing stare when he tries to linger, a silent command that quickly convinces him to retreat indoors and watch from a safe distance. She stands with the rest of the group as the nobleman suggests they begin the massive undertaking by dividing the labor among themselves. The noble's brother had left them to their task, and the woman with the glasses took charge, her voice calm as she delegated responsibilities. She requested that Logan remain by her side for assistance, while the others focused on the surrounding area. However, the air grew thick with resentment as a sharp click of the tongue echoed through the courtyard. The boy could no longer contain his simmering rage, his face contorting with a sneer as he stepped toward the young girl. To him, the idea of Frim climbing the ranks and issuing orders was nothing more than a sick joke. Watching his volatile reaction, the researcher within Frim realized that the boy had finally reached his breaking point. With a sudden, violent motion, he lunged forward and seized her, his grip tight as he snarled for her to remember her place. Frim tried to remain composed, reminding him that this was a duty entrusted to them by their master. But her words did little to quell his fury. The tension snapped into physical conflict as the others rushed in to intervene, the sound of a sharp blow cutting through the air. Logan moved with surprising speed, his massive frame looming over the boy as he declared his standing orders to protect the girl. Despite being pinned down by multiple sets of hands, the boy continued to thrash and scream, his voice a cacophony of insults and death threats. She stood trembling in the aftermath of the outburst, her hands clasped tightly against her chest as the weight of the situation settled upon her. While the immediate threat had been subdued, the raw, murderous intent in the boy's eyes left her shaken to her core. It was a stark, terrifying reminder of the volatile environment they inhabited, and she realized with a sinking heart just how precarious their new arrangement truly was. Frim stands alone, her gaze downcast as she reflects on the recent chaos. While the immediate danger has passed and a sense of calm has returned to the compound, she can't shake the feeling that the situation has escalated far beyond what she initially expected. She watches as Makia and Logan handle the heavy lifting of the aftermath, their physical labor a testament to the toll of the recent events. Makia complains about the mess, but Logan assures her they can manage, even as Makia insists on staying to give the boss a full report. Leaving them to their task, she turns to the young man beside her and suddenly freezes in embarrassment, realizing she has forgotten his name. He introduces himself as Almaroy, modestly downplaying their recent actions as nothing significant. She continues to apologize profusely, her face flushed with shame for the lapse in memory. He simply shrugs it off, suggesting they focus on getting back to their work instead. She takes his advice and begins scrubbing the stone walls, though she is acutely aware of the many eyes watching them. The silent observation from the other household members makes the mundane task feel strangely heavy. She finds a strange sense of peace in the rhythmic scrubbing, a feeling that reminds her of the cleaning videos she once watched in her past life as a researcher. Deciding they have worked enough for now, she calls out to the others to stop for a break. The young girl with the checkered headband takes a long, thirsty gulp from a wooden mug, the cool drink providing instant relief. Her eyes sparkle with delight as she tastes the liquid, exclaiming that it is far more delicious than she expected. She offers the mug to Almaroy, calling him her brother and urging him to try it. He takes a sip, the quiet moment highlighting the bond between the two as they rest from their labors. He looks down, a rare softness in his expression as he admits that things are finally looking up. His sister beams beside him, her joy a stark contrast to the heavy collar still around his neck. Observing the quiet reunion, Frim decides to give the siblings some space, sensing they have much to discuss in private. She makes a polite excuse about needing to find a restroom, gently declining the headband girl's offer to accompany her by promising she won't be gone for long. As she walks away, she glances back one last time, watching the two of them share a moment of genuine connection amidst the lingering shadows of their servitude. Night falls over the grand estate, the large windows of the manor glowing with a warm, deceptive light that masks the toil occurring within its walls. Inside the opulent bathhouse, Varsal Drajan sinks into the steaming water with a sigh of pure contentment, the heat soothing his muscles. Standing by the edge of the tub, Frim focuses her energy to keep the water hot, though she can't help but feel like little more than a living appliance. Varsal, oblivious to her internal grumbling, praises the quality of her mana-infused water, claiming it rejuvenates his very soul. He then shifts the conversation to business, inquiring about the progress of the cleanup. She informs him that they have already dealt with 12 of the remains, a feat that earns her further praise for her impressive magical stamina. Suddenly, she recalls a troubling detail from earlier and mentions the rumors of Pakis' recent outburst, her brow furrowing with concern. Hearing this, the nobleman remains unbothered, suggesting that the boy's behavior is ultimately his brother Dogger's fault and telling her not to dwell on it. She looks at him, confused by the casual way he dismisses the tension between the brothers. He explains that Pakis is simply at a rebellious age and that Dogger's heavy-handedness provided the perfect spark for defiance. With the explanation finished, he asks for another refill of hot water, and she immediately sets back to work, her hands glowing as she channels her power into the bath. The memories of a harsh childhood began to surface, centered on a boy whose very existence was questioned by the man who should have protected him. Dogger stared down at the young Pakis, his voice dripping with a cold, detached skepticism as he wondered aloud if the boy was truly his own flesh and blood. Those words, a rejection of his very being, would echo in the boy's mind for years to come. He recalled his mother's bitter words, how she had insisted he was better off without a father at all. It was a sentiment he had come to share, knowing his conception was nothing more than a drunken mistake between two people lost in a haze, a common enough tragedy in their world. Despite the darkness of his origins, he found a reason to endure in his sister, whose health remained fragile. She never truly recovered from her illness, and as she tried to reassure him, he gently urged her not to overexert herself, promising that rest would eventually bring her strength back. Driven by desperation for her sake, he eventually confronted the man who had sired him, demanding that if he truly was his father, he should finally do something to help. Dogger, however, merely looked on with a mixture of boredom and annoyance, his only response a dismissive grunt of confusion at the boy's audacity. The man's heart remained cold as he told the boy that if he needed resources, he would have to earn them himself. He claimed that Pakis's mother, Reise, had never wanted his money anyway, a cruel justification for his own neglect that left the boy standing in stunned, silent hurt. Fury replaced the hurt as he sprinted through a downpour, his heart filled with a venomous hatred for the man he wished would simply drop dead. By the time he returned to their meager shelter, he was drenched and gasping for breath, the weight of his situation pressing down on him like the heavy rain. He spent the night watching over his sister as she slept, her breathing shallow and labored. The quiet of the room was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him, a growing realization that no one was coming to save them. To ensure her survival, he turned to his half-brothers, who were all too willing to teach him the brutal trade of the streets. They showed him how to squeeze money from rivals, how to fight with a desperation that made up for his small stature and the dark art of extortion. Also, he could afford the medicine his sister so desperately needed. The lessons grew darker as the rain continued to fall, stripping away what remained of his innocence. He learned that in their world, survival often required more than just theft or intimidation. Eventually, he was taught the cold, mechanical necessity of how to take a life. He looked at his sister, seeing her not just as a sibling, but as a burden he was determined to carry. Because she was timid and barely spoke, he began to pass on the harsh lessons he had mastered, teaching her the same brutal survival skills he had been forced to learn for himself. He gritted his teeth, the news of the girl's new position under the boss stinging like a fresh wound. When an associate mentioned that the leader actually took a liking to her, his frustration boiled over into a sharp curse, unable to fathom how she had ascended so quickly while he remained in the dirt. Seeking solace from the harsh reality of the streets, he returned to the bedside of his frail sister. She apologized for her weakness, her voice a mere whisper, but he gently hushed her, urging her to simply rest and not worry about the burdens he carried. As he sat by her side, he vented his frustrations about work, complaining that the subordinate he'd been assigned was slow and utterly useless. His sister listened quietly, offering a sympathetic ear to his fabricated grievances as he tried to maintain the facade of a capable provider. She then looked at him with genuine concern, asking if the man they served was treating him well. He forced a smile, masking the brutality of his daily life with a hollow assurance that everything was fine, unwilling to let her know the true cost of their survival. But the truth was far grimmer, as he recalled the relentless beatings and the crushing weight of failure that had begun to define his existence. He wondered where it had all started to spiral out of control, his body aching from the memory of every kick and blow he had endured in silence. The turning point was clear in his mind. Everything had begun to crumble the moment the girl left. Now, he lay broken on the cold floor, justifying his cruelty as a necessary lesson he had tried to impart, even as his own blood pooled beneath him. His justifications meant little to the man looming over him, who demanded to know why he had attempted to kill such a useful asset. He stammered out that he was merely trying to humble her, to put her back in her place through fear, but the excuse rang hollow in the face of the boss's cold fury. A heavy blow across the face silenced his excuses, the force of the impact sending him reeling. The boss made it clear that his actions had crossed a line, regardless of his intentions, and that his usefulness was rapidly reaching its end. Thrown into a dark cell, he watched through the bars as the man walked away, leaving him to reflect on his dire situation. He realized then that he had truly pushed his luck too far this time, and the consequences would be far more severe than a simple beating. Beyond the confines of his prison, the grand halls of the estate remained silent and imposing, a stark contrast to the violence unfolding within its hidden depths. The architecture stood as a testament to a power that cared little for the individual lives it crushed in its wake. Frim paced nervously, her mind racing with dark possibilities. She had expected Logan and Makia to return immediately after dropping Pakis off, but the silence was deafening. A terrifying thought struck her. What if Pakis had lied, and they were being punished in his stead? The sound of a distant, agonized scream echoing through the halls only fueled her growing panic. Her fears were momentarily quelled when the door finally opened, revealing the familiar figures of the large man and the muscular woman. Relief washed over her as she rushed toward them, her voice trembling as she expressed her profound gratitude that they were both unharmed. They seemed taken aback by her genuine concern. Logan offered a small, weary smile, while Makia apologized for causing her such distress. The unexpected warmth in their voices left her momentarily stunned, struggling to process this display of empathy. As they walked, she couldn't help but reflect on the harsh reality of their world, where the lives of slaves were usually treated with utter indifference. Makia, sensing her lingering unease, suggested they continue their conversation in the privacy of their room, eager to hear the rest of what had transpired. Upon entering the room, she froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Someone was already there, lounging casually on one of the beds. The sudden presence in what she considered a safe space sent a jolt of alarm through her small frame. The intruder sat up, revealing himself to be the young man she had seen previously at the arena's restricted entrance. She recognized him instantly as Pakis's brother, his sharp features and messy hair a clear reflection of the boy she had tried to help. He noticed her stiff posture and offered a casual greeting, telling her there was no need for such formality and that she should simply use his name. She recalled seeing him speak with Pakis before, though their relationship seemed strained and distant. A wave of embarrassment hit her as she realized that, despite their previous encounter, she had never actually learned his name. He seemed to find her flustered reaction amusing, noting that knowing his identity might be useful for the work they were expected to do. With a playful glint in his eyes, he introduced himself as Mulad, though he invited her to use the shorter nickname, Mud. She bowed her head in apology, explaining that Pakis had only ever referred to him as his brother, leaving her ignorant of his true name until now. His expression darkened in an instant, his eyes narrowing with a sudden, sharp intensity. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, demanding tone as he asked her why Pakis had been so incredibly angry. He stands before her with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, his presence suddenly overwhelming. Frim realizes with a jolt of panic that she is in a dire situation. She stammers, trying to find the right words to deflect his questioning, but her mind races as she wonders if her secret or her involvement in Pakis's anger has been discovered. Frim stands before Mulad, her mind racing as she observes his calm demeanor. She notes the absence of any lingering resentment in his gaze, despite the circumstances that brought them together, and wonders what truly lies beneath his stoic exterior. He offers a faint, enigmatic smile, prompting her to wonder if his composed nature masks a deeper frustration of being placed under the command of a mere child by official orders. Breaking the silence, the young man acknowledges the unfortunate hand they've been dealt, his voice carrying a weary acceptance of their shared lot as he looks down at her small, uncertain figure. She quickly offers an apology for the trouble her companion, Pakis, has caused, but he brushes it off with a casual wave. He places the blame squarely on the boy's shoulders, leaving her stunned by his lack of animosity regarding the recent incident. Turning her attention to their sleeping arrangements, the girl expresses her concern that sharing the beds might be seen as a sign of disrespect toward him. However, she also fears the mansion staff would take offense if they ignored the provided comforts and slept on the floor like common laborers. He remains firm, however, insisting that everyone should take advantage of the beds provided. His kind expression eases the tension in the room as he encourages them to rest properly for the work ahead. With a soft word of gratitude, she watches as the light is extinguished, the room plunging into a quiet, moonlit stillness that feels strangely peaceful given their circumstances. As they settle in, he explains his reasoning, noting that as their supervisor, it is his duty to ensure the well-being of those who belong to the boss. It is a pragmatic view that she ponders while pulling the blankets tight, realizing his kindness is tied to his professional obligations. The young man closes his eyes, his final thoughts a quiet affirmation of the inherent humanity of even those bound in chains. They exchange soft wishes for a restful night, the barrier between master and servant blurring for a brief moment in the dark. Days of labor follow at the Drajan Manor, and as she works alongside the others to clean the ornate statues, she finds herself questioning her own perspective. She realizes that her growing respect for a supervisor might be clouding her understanding of the harsh, unforgiving realities of this world. She stands quietly as Varsal vents his frustrations, his voice rising with a touch of bitterness. He gestures toward the statues of famous nobles lining the hall, dismissing them as petty and beneath his concern. His family, a lineage of stone-attack mages, has long been at odds with these houses, and the sight of their monuments only serves to irritate him. Despite his initial outburst, he begins to explain the significance of the figures, noting that their placement and attire are far from random. Each statue serves as a map to a specific domain, with every detail of their gear carrying a hidden meaning that Frim finds herself contemplating. He turns his attention back to her, suggesting that her immense magical capacity might be a sign of noble blood flowing through her veins. With a knowing smile, he remarks that the world is far more complex and full of hidden truths than it appears on the surface. The suggestion catches her off guard, prompting a quiet admission that she was merely a child of the alleyways, discarded by society. She looks down, the weight of her past as an outcast momentarily clouding her expression. A sudden wave of internal conflict washes over her as she questions why she even entertained the thought of a different life. The memories of her previous existence and her current reality clash, leaving her momentarily lost in her own thoughts. Sensing her distress, the nobleman reaches out and rests a heavy, comforting hand on her head. He acknowledges the hardships she must have faced, his tone softening with a rare moment of genuine empathy. He reflects on the burdens everyone carries, sharing that even he and his brother, Dogger, were never on good terms with their father, leading to Dogger's own exile. The somber mood is quickly broken by Makia, who boisterously rallies the group she calls the Water Mage Bunch, offering blunt and violent advice on how to properly handle a blade. Soon, they are led to a grand dining hall where a lavish feast has been prepared in their honor. Varsal encourages them to eat until they burst, explaining that this hospitality is a gesture of gratitude for their hard work before they conclude their tasks the following day. As the group begins to dig into the mountain of food with infectious enthusiasm, she offers a sincere word of thanks. The atmosphere is filled with the sounds of clinking cutlery and cheerful chatter, a stark contrast to the tension of their usual lives. Before the meal concludes, he makes a final request, asking if she could provide a large supply of her magically produced water. He admits he has grown fond of its quality and wants to ensure he has enough to last, a request she accepts with a bright, determined smile. She focuses on the task at hand, channeling her magic to fill a large tank, while Makia cheers enthusiastically. The repetitive nature of the work makes her feel like a common laborer at a fueling station, a strange and distant memory from her past life. As she works, she can feel Varsel's intense gaze lingering on her, making the labor feel even more strenuous. He muses aloud that her natural talent and refined control suggest she might have been born into a far more noble lineage than her current circumstances imply. Once the work is finished, the entire manor gleams with an unnatural brilliance, every surface polished to perfection. The transformation is so complete that even the master of the house can't hide his astonishment at the pristine state of his home. Pleased with the results, the nobleman presents a small, ornate box as a reward for their hard work. Nearby, Makia reflects on the unexpected turn of events that led them to clean the entire mansion, though she admits the outcome is impressive. He specifically addresses the young girl, handing her the box and explaining that he found a duplicate water grimoire while tidying the storeroom. He insists that she should have it, recognizing her unique affinity for the element. The gift comes with a stern piece of advice. She must use the knowledge within to refine her skills, as he considers an unpolished talent to be as unsightly as a rusted blade. Though she finds his metaphors a bit dramatic, she accepts the book with a determined nod. With the business concluded, the group prepares to depart, heading back toward the familiar territory of the gambling house. They offer their polite thanks to their host as they step out into the cooling air, leaving the manor behind. However, as they navigate the winding back streets, she begins to feel a sense of unease, questioning why their route has led them into such a desolate and unfamiliar alleyway. Her intuition proves correct when her companion suddenly turns on her, drawing a blade and demanding the grimoire she just received. He dismisses her shock, telling her to simply accept her misfortune and keep her mouth shut about the theft. Realizing she has been far too trusting, she watches in dismay as he reveals his plan to seize all the reward money for himself. He warns her that they will deal with the consequences later, but for now, she must obey. The weight of her mistake sinks in, and she can already imagine the lecture she'll receive for letting her guard down. She stands frozen as a voice cuts through the tension. Pakis, with a predatory smirk, addresses Myud, demanding to know what is happening. Makia stands nearby, her expression unreadable as the situation escalates. Because of this sudden confrontation, the young girl's eyes widen in terror. Pakis barks an order for no one to move or speak, his knife still a lethal threat. He emphasizes that this is a direct command, forcing a heavy silence upon the group. In response to his own demands, he continues to brandish his blade, ordering them to enter a nearby room and forbidding them from leaving. Meanwhile, Makia appears to be in physical distress, clutching her throat as if being choked by an unseen force, while Myud watches, seemingly bound by the same order. Moments later, the imposing figure of Logan appears, carrying a heavy burden. Pakis dismisses any hope of resistance, coldly stating that effort is useless. The young girl lets out a small cry of fear as the weight of their predicament settles in. As the chaos unfolds, her attention shifts to Logan, who has now knelt down. She calls out his name in disbelief, her voice trembling as she witnesses the strong man she once knew acting under some form of compulsion or grim duty. While she watches, Logan stands and begins to walk away, still carrying his load. She realizes with a sinking heart that even though he can move, he is strictly following orders, just like Myud. The realization that her allies are being controlled or have turned against her is paralyzing. Because of the boy's relentless pressure, she is forced to back up into the shadows of a doorway. Pakis, still holding his weapon, offers a hollow apology, his tone devoid of any real remorse as he drives her further into isolation. With a final, mocking farewell, he bids her goodbye. His eyes are closed in a self-satisfied grin, the betrayal complete as he prepares to leave her behind in the darkness. The next moment, the heavy door slams shut with a resounding thud, the latch clicking into place. She is left alone in the dim light, the sudden silence of the room feeling more oppressive than the threats that preceded it. Overwhelmed by the rapid succession of events, she clutches her head in desperation. Her mind races, trying to make sense of the betrayal and the strange behavior of her friends, left with nothing but the echoing question of what is truly happening. She sits in the dim light of their confinement, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and bewilderment as she looks toward the silent, hulking figure of Logan. Around them, the other children, the girl with the checkered headband and the stoic Myud, remain equally trapped, the weight of their sudden imprisonment pressing down on the small room. Because of the suffocating silence, she pulls her knees to her chest, her mind racing with questions that have no answers. She struggles to make sense of the betrayal, wondering why Pakis would steal her hard-earned reward and why Logan seemed to anticipate this outcome. all while the mystery of their incarceration gnaws at her spirit. Desperate for any scrap of clarity, the young girl turns her gaze back to the large man, pleading for him to explain the meaning behind these events. Logan, however, only bows his head further, his silence a heavy barrier that suggests he is bound by an order he cannot, or will not break. Seeing his refusal to speak, she tentatively asks if he would cause her harm should she attempt to escape their prison. He remains motionless, his lack of response leading her to the grim realization that he might be physically or magically incapable of speech. In response to his continued stillness, she asks a darker question, her voice trembling as she wonders if his presence there is meant to be her end. Logan finally reacts, a slow and deliberate shake of his head signaling that he is not there to take her life, though the reason for his presence remains a mystery. As she watches him, she notices a shared look of bitter resignation between Logan and Myud, realizing that they are both victims of the same unseen chains. Resigning herself to their current fate, she suggests to the others that they should try to rest, as there is no immediate way out of their locked chamber. Moments later, she sinks back against the cold wooden wall, her small frame looking even more fragile in the shadows. The initial panic has faded into a dull, aching exhaustion as she waits for a change that feels like it may never come. The hours crawl by in the oppressive quiet, and she eventually loses track of time, guessing that perhaps half a day has passed since they were first thrown into the dark. The isolation is absolute, broken only by the rhythmic breathing of her fellow captives. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic clatter echoes through the room, causing her to bolt upright with a gasp. Her pupils dilate in the sudden rush of adrenaline, her heart hammering against her ribs as the sound of a heavy lock being disengaged shatters the silence. The heavy door creaks open, and the imposing silhouette of the boss, Dogger, fills the frame, his presence casting a long, intimidating shadow over the cowering girl. She can only stare in stunned silence, her breath hitching as she realizes the man she feared most has come for her. Dogger dismisses the boys, acknowledging the trouble they've caused. Pakis and Mulad stand before him, looking defeated after their failed scheme. The older boy bows his head in a sincere apology. Frim watches the exchange from the side, her expression unkempt and unreadable as the boss looms over them. She is left completely bewildered by the sudden shift in atmosphere, her wide eyes searching for an explanation for their desperate actions. The truth begins to surface through a series of recollections. It turns out that Pakis's other brother, Reise, had fallen gravely ill and required expensive medicine. Mulad had been trying to manage the situation, even as Pakis grew desperate enough to consider theft. He had planned to use the reward from Lord Varsal to cover the medical costs, while the magic tome was intended to handle any additional expenses that might arise. The young girl realizes the depth of their desperation, noting that Mulad had even risked being stabbed to protect Pakis. Logan steps forward, offering a sincere apology for his part in assisting the boys' clandestine plans. The large man explains that he was already aware of their predicament and had hoped to resolve it himself before things escalated further. He prompts Pakis to apologize properly, and the boy mutters a defensive apology while Frim looks on. Seeing the conflict settled, the boss turns his attention to the girl, offering to buy her whatever she wants as a reward. After a moment of thought, she excitedly requests a magical staff, having read about their power in her books. He grunts in acknowledgement, handing over a heavy pouch of coins. He notes that she has worked hard and that the gambling hall's success has provided ample funds. The stern leader maintains his composure, insisting that the money is merely surplus and that she should take it without further question. He saw his influence spread as word of their work reached the ears of Lord Varsal. For the young girl, the days became a blur of cleaning brothels and auction houses, her mind constantly drifting to the need for Reise's medicine. He noted that business was flourishing in the capital, drawing more people to his crew. While he had requested a magical staff for the girl from Lord Varsal, the process was delayed by an upcoming ceremony, leaving her to wait. She found no peace even when the work was done, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. A foul, overwhelming stench filled the air, making sleep an impossible luxury. She traced the odor to the mountains of second-hand clothes sent to them for cleaning. The attempt to mask the rot with heavy perfume only created a more nauseating miasma that threatened to overwhelm her senses. She finally snapped, slamming her hand onto the table with a look of grim determination that startled the men. Despite her apparent exhaustion, she demanded to present a proposal to revolutionize their operations. She began a rapid-fire explanation of her vision, covering everything from financial management and uniform standards to new gambling attractions like small animal races. The crew watched in stunned silence as she detailed how to improve the hall's reputation. She concluded her impassioned speech by advocating for the establishment of a dedicated laundry business. Her logic was cold and practical. It would improve hygiene, reduce the death rate among the workers, and make efficient use of the available labor. He was left speechless by the sheer scale of her ambition, eventually relenting and telling her to get some rest. She walked away with a confident stride, dismissing the complexity of her plan as a simple task. He watched her go, then turned to his men with a stern warning to keep their voices down. The boss recognized the value of her insight and ensured she would not be disturbed. She awoke some time later on a soft sofa, her memory of the previous hours a hazy fog. Looking around the quiet room, she wondered how she had ended up there and what had transpired during her outburst. She looks up at the large man, stammering an apology for the trouble she caused. Dogger, however, dismisses her concerns with uncharacteristic patience, noting that her exhaustion was only natural for a child. His sudden leniency leaves her wide-eyed and reeling in shock. Prompted by his unexpected display of kindness, she is urged to eat before recounting the details of the business proposal she had mentioned the previous night. A cold sweat breaks across her brow as she desperately tries to piece together the hazy memories of what she might have promised before drifting off to sleep. Once she has gathered her thoughts, she begins to outline the concept of a dedicated laundry department to the gathered group. Makia listens with genuine curiosity, admitting that the task is entirely foreign to her, while the others observe from within the confines of their shared quarters. Continuing her explanation, she emphasizes the need for a balanced approach to management, acknowledging that while they shouldn't be overly harsh, they must remain vigilant against laziness. She turns to Makia, suggesting that the woman's keen bespoke senses would be invaluable for ensuring the quality of their work by sniffing out any lingering odors. With the plan taking shape, she begins delegating specific responsibilities, appointing Almaroy to oversee the daily operations of the laundry. Makia accepts a role with a boisterous grin and a flex of her powerful arms, ready to take on the new challenge. Turning her attention to the others, she asks Tallarine to take charge of instructing the workers on the proper washing techniques. The young girl with the checkered headband stands ready, her expression bright at the prospect of the new routine. The girl's excitement stems from the fact that she will be working alongside her brother, though her joy is met with Almaroy's usual stoic silence. Watching the exchange, the young girl can't help but feel skeptical, questioning if the young man's blank stare truly masks a sense of happiness. Her doubts only grow as she stares at the expressionless lizard man, flatly disagreeing with the suggestion that he looks pleased. Even Logan stands by, his massive frame casting a shadow as the group discusses the difficulty of reading the quiet warrior's emotions. Seeking to understand her new companions better, she gently inquires about the circumstances that led them into slavery. Makia is the first to share, recounting her past as an adventurer and how a companion's mounting debts and her own reliance on force eventually led her to this life. Following her lead, the siblings explain their own tragic origins as half-blood lizardmen from a land ravaged by drought. With their wetlands dried up and food scarce, their own village made the desperate choice to sell them into the slave trade to ensure the survival of the rest. He stands before the others, his voice steady as he confesses to the ultimate crime. He killed their former master. Kedin looks on, confused by the sudden admission, while Tallarine remains silent by his side, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. His sister quickly interjects to explain the circumstances, her eyes downcast as she recalls the merchant's drunken rage. She describes how their master had been beating her when her brother, hearing her cries from the next room, broke down the door and rushed in to save her. She continues the somber tale, explaining that the death was a tragic accident rather than a calculated murder. During the struggle in their small, cramped shack, a heavy beam was dislodged from the ceiling, falling and striking the merchant with fatal force. The seamstress explains that because the merchant had been deeply in debt to Lord Dogger, the siblings were seized as payment for his outstanding balance. Her brother was designated as a combat slave due to his strength, while she was made a seamstress, and they were both brought to this place to serve. Frim listens intently to the harrowing story, her expression softening with empathy for the hardships they've endured. Behind her, Logan stands quietly, his own heavy collar a constant reminder of the shared status that binds them all together in this underworld. The large, bald man speaks up, his voice gravelly but kind, noting that everyone in this place is simply doing their best to survive. He thanks Frim for her consideration, assuring her that she needn't trouble herself with their past burdens now that they have a new purpose. She looks back at the diverse group, the quiet Tallarine, the stoic Almaroy, and the ever-cheerful Kedin, feeling a growing sense of responsibility for their well-being and a desire to make their current lives more bearable. Shaking off the heavy atmosphere, she points toward the massive pile of soiled garments, declaring that they should focus on the task at hand. She encourages them to pull together and begin the laundry work immediately, turning their collective energy toward a productive goal. While the others respond with enthusiastic cheers, she can't help but feel a twinge of guilt, thinking that using her magical gifts for such mundane chores might be an abuse of her power. Nevertheless, she resolves to use every tool at her disposal to ensure their success. Despite her inner conflict, she raises her hand and invokes her magic, calling forth a swirling vortex of water. The water strike hits the tub with precision, the ultrasonic vibrations from her past life knowledge instantly lifting the grime from the fabric as she observes the process with a researcher's keen eye. She contemplates the possibilities of her magic, realizing that her ability to manipulate hydrogen peroxide allows for bleaching and disinfection, potentially turning this chore into a lucrative laundry business. Her musings are interrupted by the arrival of the boss, whose grim expression immediately catches her attention as he reports that the laundry operations are facing difficulties. He explains that although the garments are being cleaned, the low quality of the fabric causes them to deteriorate rapidly, leading her to propose recycling the damaged materials. Taking her suggestion further, he outlines a plan to acquire inexpensive secondhand clothing following the royal capital's ceremony and integrate it with their salvaged textiles to launch a large-scale sewing and contracting enterprise. While she acknowledges his leadership, she tentatively suggests that he should delegate more tasks to his subordinates rather than shoulder every burden alone, only to immediately recoil in fear at her own audacity. To her surprise, he responds with a gentle gesture, ruffling her hair while admitting that his past experiences with betrayal had made him reluctant to trust others, though he now sees the wisdom in her advice. Watching him walk away, she finds herself grappling with a complex realization. While the moral standards of her former life would label him a monster, the reality of this world is far more nuanced. She understands now that in a land where survival is a constant struggle, his harsh discipline is a necessary tool to guide subordinates who have never known the difference between right and wrong. He speaks of the heavy resolve required of one who stands above others, a burden he seems prepared to carry regardless of the cost. As she observes him, she finally recognizes that despite his brutality, he is a man driven by a rigid set of personal convictions. She looked up, her expression softening into a look of pure, unadulterated resolve. A bright smile spread across her face as she declared that she, too, would give her absolute best to the task ahead, matching the commitment shown by her companions. The carriage rolls through the grand gates of the Drajan estate, marking the return of the family scion. Varsal finds the traditional ceremonies of his ancestral home to be a tedious affair, a sentiment reflected in his weary posture as he arrives. He surveys the grounds, noting that while this is technically his domain, it feels strangely alien to him. He is struck by the pristine condition of the stone walls and stairs, realizing the Drajan household doesn't usually maintain such high standards of cleanliness. An attendant informs him of a merchant slave, a young girl who possesses a peculiar and powerful brand of magic. The news piques his interest, a subtle smirk playing on his lips as he considers how such a unique asset might be utilized. Back at the hideout, Dogger is in a state of visible panic, his voice booming through the halls as he realizes Frim has been taken under the guise of being borrowed for official business. The news of her sudden departure has clearly rattled the brute. He lashes out in a fit of rage, grabbing his brother by the collar and accusing him of selling the girl out to the authorities. The tension in the room is thick as he bellows about the immense trouble this unexpected development will bring to their operations. His expression shifts to one of grim realization as he explains that the orders came directly from the royal palace. It is a mandate that even a man of his stature cannot ignore without risking total annihilation, leaving him feeling trapped by the weight of noble authority. Amidst the chaos and shouting, the young girl herself remains remarkably calm, looking up at her captor with wide, curious eyes. She asks with genuine innocence exactly what kind of work she will be expected to perform at the palace. She offers a small, hopeful smile, suggesting that if her previous cleaning efforts were so well received that they caught the attention of the highborn, perhaps this new assignment is simply a reward for her diligence. Her optimism stands in stark contrast to the grim atmosphere. Her eyes shine with a naive but firm determination as she explains her desire to trust those who took her in. She hopes that by performing her duties well, her efforts will eventually be recognized by the nobility, allowing her to secure a more stable place in this harsh world. Unmoved by her optimism, the brute turns his fury back toward his twin, cursing the day such a troublesome item was brought into their lives. Meanwhile, the nobleman simply watches the exchange with a cold, calculating gaze, his true intentions hidden behind a mask of aristocratic indifference. Frim sits in quiet contemplation, discussing the daunting prospect of her summons to the royal palace with a man who has become a silent guardian to her. Seeing her trepidation, he reaches out and offers a small, cloth-wrapped bundle as a parting gift. He explains that the package contains a wooden bowl and spoon, a vital necessity because the palace staff often neglects to provide utensils to those they deem of low birth. She accepts the gift with a humble bow, deeply moved by his practical kindness and the realization that she will soon be on her own. As he kneels to offer a final word of caution, she realizes that despite the distance that had grown between them since the incident with Milad, his concern for her safety remains unchanged. She responds with a firm, resolute nod, steeling herself for the journey ahead. Soon after, she is escorted to a hidden part of the estate by the organization's formidable leader, who uses his massive strength to heave open a concealed stone door. He commands her to enter the secret vault quickly, his eyes scanning the corridor for any unwanted witnesses to their meeting. Surrounded by piles of luxury goods, he begins searching through the crates until he finds a set of fine garments, insisting that she must appear as a person of status to avoid being looked down upon by the nobility. He knows that in the palace, appearances are the only shield she will have. After a quick change, she stands before him in the elegant new dress, her eyes sparkling with wonder as she asks for his thoughts on her startling transformation. Standing before a mirror, the young girl admires the fine new dress she has been given, though she worries about the high cost of such quality fabric. Dogger dismisses her concerns with a gruff kindness, insisting that the outfit suits her perfectly and even handing her extra coin for other necessities. He explains that in the royal capital, appearances are a form of combat. To be looked down upon is to lose before the fight even begins. As they prepare for the journey ahead, he notes that while Varsal is occupied with other duties, she still needs proper equipment, specifically a knife and a magical staff, as a mage without a focus is rarely taken seriously. The large man reflects on his own past, mentioning how he once searched for something that would suit his own father, but found nothing. When she reacts with surprise at the mention of his family, he quickly becomes flustered, telling her to forget he ever brought up such a sentimental topic. She soon discovers a small, slender staff among the wares and holds it up with a bright, infectious smile, finding its weight and size perfect for her small hands. Her sudden enthusiasm catches him off guard, leaving him momentarily speechless at her genuine joy over such a simple tool. They examine the item more closely, and he identifies it as a dark attribute staff, warning her that it feels like the sort of concealed weapon an assassin might favor. Despite the ominous description, she feels a faint resonance with the object, and he tells her to keep it, noting that having even a suspicious tool is better than being defenseless. Hours later, the nobleman Varsal Drajan enters the quiet room to collect the girl, only to find her completely surrendered to exhaustion. She has fallen into a deep sleep, the weight of her recent trials finally catching up to her in the safety of the room. He gestures for silence, sharply rebuking his brother for being too loud near the sleeping child. Dogger looks on, his usual intimidating aura softened as he watches her peaceful, rhythmic breathing. The two brothers speak in hushed tones about how she must have drifted off while trying to read, acknowledging the immense physical and mental strain she has endured over the past few days. Varsal decides to carry her himself, noting with a hint of pity that despite her magical potential, she is still very much a child who needs rest. He prepares to depart, and Dogger entrusts him with her safety, urging him to see her home without incident. There's a heavy moment of unspoken understanding between the twins as Dogger apologizes for being unable to fulfill a certain promise, while Varsal simply tells him to ensure his own safe return. She awakens with a sudden gasp, finding herself being carried through the cool night air. Disoriented, she initially calls out for Dogger, but Varsal gently calms her, identifying himself and encouraging her to look out at the breathtaking view of the city lights below them. She gazes out the carriage window, her eyes wide with wonder as the massive spires of the royal palace come into view. Beside her, the nobleman confirms that they have finally arrived at their destination. The carriage passes through the grand gates of the sprawling estate, a place of architectural splendor that seems a world away from the grime of her past. Her companion informs her that this magnificent fortress will be her new place of employment. However, the transition is not as immediate as she expected. After a full day of waiting in silence within the opulent halls, she begins to spiral into a panic, clutching her head as she realizes she hasn't been given a single task to perform, fearing this stagnant state might last for days. Her anxiety is interrupted when the nobleman returns, accompanied by a refined man with glasses named Luke Lesson. The nobleman introduces him as a trusted associate who will look after her and provide guidance, as his own duties will often keep him away from her side. He further explains that she will be staying in a private room for a while until the necessary arrangements are finalized. Sensing her restlessness, he suggests she use the secluded courtyard to practice her magic, or simply pass the time as she sees fit. Taking his advice, she ventures into the elegant garden and draws her new, slender staff. She focuses her intent, calling forth the power of the water blade with a determined breath. With a sharp, decisive motion, she releases the spell, sending a pressurized stream of water slicing through the air with surprising force. Despite the successful cast, she frowns at the weapon in her hand, noting how difficult it is to channel her mana through the unfamiliar focus. She realizes that much of her energy is being lost in the process, making precise control a challenge, and she reminds herself not to touch anything else in the garden without permission. She pauses to reflect on her new surroundings, finding a strange comfort in the quiet beauty of the palace. For the first time, she feels less like a desperate child of the slums and more like a young apprentice from a noble house, until a voice suddenly breaks her solitude. A young man dressed in practical work clothes approaches, questioning her presence in the courtyard and why she is practicing magic there. She is struck by how clean and well-kept he appears, despite his humble attire, and wonders about the identity of this unexpected newcomer. He leans in closer, observing her with a casual air and noting that she appears to come from a respectable family. Frim, however, is immediately on edge. Her eyes widen and a bead of sweat rolls down her cheek as she forces a strained, awkward smile. Every fiber of her being screams that this stranger is incredibly suspicious, and she tenses up, unsure of his true intentions as he continues to approach her in the secluded courtyard. Frim stands in the courtyard, her gaze fixed on the young man who has approached her. He offers a warm, easy smile, his posture relaxed as he initiates a conversation. He explains his presence, identifying himself as a mere apprentice servant within the estate. Frim listens intently, her expression a mix of curiosity and the guardedness she has learned to maintain in this unfamiliar environment. The boy finds her reaction amusing, noting that despite her noble-like appearance, she carries herself with a simplicity that reminds him of common folk. He admits he might have been a bit too casual in his approach, but his tone remains friendly and disarming. Reaching into his belongings, he produces a collection of delicate sweets, carefully wrapped in a handkerchief of surprisingly high quality. He enthusiastically invites her to share them, presenting the treats as a friendly gesture. She stares at the offering, her mind racing with suspicion. The sheer luxury of the handkerchief and the suddenness of the gift trigger her internal alarms, making her wonder about the true intentions of this apprentice. He then questions why she is in such a place, prompting her to reveal the strange circumstances of her stay. She explains that she was hired for a magical cleaning task, but has been confined to the estate for 10 days, a situation he finds quite unusual and concerning. Sensing her unease, he suggests they move to a more private location where they can talk further without being overheard. Frim agrees, seeing an opportunity to learn more, and they part ways with a promise to meet again soon. Shortly thereafter, she recounts the entire encounter to Luke Lesson. He listens with a grave expression, his professional demeanor sharpening as he processes the details of the mysterious boy and his suspicious gift. He questions her further about the sweets, and she confirms that she hasn't touched them. She admits that the fear of poison kept her from accepting the boy's hospitality, a cautious instinct that Luke clearly approves of. Taking the wrapped treats, he informs her that he will report the incident to Master Varsal immediately. He assures her that he will personally see to the disposal of the potentially dangerous sweets, his face set in a mask of stern duty. He had set the entire palace into a state of high alert. Following the report of a suspicious individual, the once quiet grounds of the temporary royal palace were now buzzing with activity as guards conducted a thorough search for the intruder who had suddenly appeared. Because of his diligence, Varsal Drajan expressed his approval, noting that the situation was handled with impressive speed. Varsal decided to take over the direct supervision of the area, instructing that the tools in the small shed be left for use as needed, while Luke apologized for the disruption the security breach had caused. As they stood before the modest structure, the master proposed that Frim should reside there for the time being. He explained that it would be a safer measure against intruders, as the room was more secure than her previous quarters, with sturdy doors and windows that offered better protection. Moments later, the aide reinforced the gravity of the situation, instructing her that if any suspicious person were to appear, she must not hesitate to use her attack magic to repel them. She nodded firmly, accepting the responsibility of her own defense. With the weight of that duty in mind, she returned to the fountain to hone her skills. Concentrating her energy, she commanded the water to rise, her small hand outstretched as she focused on the fluid element. The results were immediate and powerful. Several sharp jets of water erupted from the basin, streaking through the air with lethal precision. Watching the droplets fall back into the pool, she felt a surge of satisfaction. Her practice was clearly paying off, and she noted with a quiet smile that her control over the number of water projectiles was becoming much more refined. Her confidence grew until she let out a defiant laugh, shouting into the open air that she was ready for any intruder, no matter where they might come from. However, as the days turned into a routine of cleaning and training, the anticipated threat never materialized. While the lack of intruders was a relief, she couldn't help but feel a lingering curiosity, wondering what had become of the boy she had met in the garden and what would happen if he were actually caught. This peaceful, if slightly tense, routine was punctuated by regular visits from Varsal himself, who personally delivered meals to her twice a day. As he called out to her with her food, she responded with a simple, polite acknowledgement, settling into her new life within the palace walls. She takes a large bite of snack, her eyes wide with simple joy. In this world, the number of meals one receives, 2 or 3, is often a reflection of their social standing, with leftovers from superiors trickling down to those below. Yet, despite her humble position, she never finds herself wanting for food. As she sits at a small table, Luke Lesson approaches, offering her even more to eat. The reason for her constant satiety is simple. He ensures she is never hungry by frequently preparing and providing her with a variety of sweets and snacks. With a blissful expression and flushed cheeks, she savors the treats, her heart full of gratitude for the unexpected kindness. Luke and Frim sit together as he explains the current state of the Drajan household, mentioning that Varsal is currently acting as the head while the true master is away. Varsal is depicted in a moment of reflection, considering the deep-seated animosity between the noble families that continues to threaten the stability of the realm. He recalls the succession crisis from years past, a period of great upheaval that occurred long before Frim's arrival in this world. The nobleman warns that if the internal strife doesn't cease, the kingdom will be left vulnerable to the ambitions of neighboring countries. Shifting back to their studies, Luke presents a chart of the 4 great families, explaining how these lineages have historically governed the magical elements. He details how the original structure of these families has been altered by centuries of conflict, internal rebellion, and strategic marriages. The instructor emphasizes how rare the water attribute is, noting that Frim's unique affinity makes her a person of significant interest and potential protection. Later, while walking through the grounds, Frim is startled by a sudden, cheerful shout from the boy she met in the garden. The boy approaches with a curious grin, asking for her name and which family she belongs to. He then catches himself, realizing it was impolite to demand her name before offering his own, and prepares to introduce himself properly. He introduces himself with a name that rings with an unexpected weight, calm Regia. When he asks for her own name, she offers only Frim, admitting she possesses no family name to accompany it. He simply smiles, confirming that Regia is indeed his own surname. She watches him depart, her mind racing with suspicion. The encounter feels wrong, and she briefly contemplates whether a blast of her water magic would be a fitting response to such a dubious stranger. Later, she recounts the strange meeting to Luke, mentioning the name the boy claimed as his own. The atmosphere in the room shifts instantly as the weight of that name settles between them. Luke explains the gravity of the situation, noting that the name Regia belongs to the family of the Prime Minister himself. He questions her about whether the boy bore a family crest, a detail she is certain was missing. He continues his explanation, stressing that if the boy truly belongs to such a high-ranking house, his presence is even more concerning. Nobles typically display their crests prominently, yet Frim reiterates that she saw no such mark on his person. Concerned for her safety, he hands her a small knife, instructing her to use it or her magic without hesitation should the intruder return. He then requests that she provide a visual record of the boy's appearance. The resulting portrait is soon scrutinized by Varsal, who observes that the boy's black hair and eyes are indeed characteristic of the Prime Minister's bloodline. He calls out to his brother, his voice sharp with a new urgency. While the men discuss the implications, she uses a magical device to create copies of her drawing. She marvels at the strange machine, which uses heat to perfectly replicate the image before her eyes. Nearby, Dogger seethes with a quiet, violent rage. The idea of someone brazenly using the Prime Minister's name in their territory is an insult he cannot tolerate, and he vows to deal with the intruder personally. Finally, Varsal offers a stern warning, suggesting that the boy's repeated visits imply a specific, hidden purpose. He urges her to remain vigilant and keep the doors barred, a command she accepts with a solemn nod. She wandered through the manicured gardens of the estate, her mind occupied with her duties. As she contemplated which section to tidy next, a voice broke her concentration. A man, observing her from the shadows of a grand archway, remarked on the quality of her work, noting that she seemed to be taking on even more tasks than assigned. He stepped forward, his presence commanding, yet strangely polite. Startled by the sudden proximity of this finely dressed stranger, she looked up in confusion. The man, adorned in a fur-lined cloak and a feathered cap, leaned in slightly, inquiring if she had some specific business with him or if she was simply lost in her thoughts. Without waiting for a reply, he dropped a bombshell of a proposal, asking if she would consider entering his service and working for his household. The sheer audacity of the offer left her speechless, her eyes widening as a faint, bewildered sound escaped her lips. The prospect of being recruited by such a high-ranking figure was entirely outside her expectations. The moment was shattered as a group of other noblemen suddenly converged on them, their voices raised in protest. One man pointed an accusing finger, shouting that he had been watching her first and that no one should try to steal a march on the others. They began to crowd around, each brandishing gifts and shouting their own invitations, desperate to secure her favor before their rivals could. She stood frozen, completely overwhelmed by the chaotic scene unfolding around her. Hands reached out from all sides, offering tokens of wealth and prestige as the competition for her services reached a fever pitch. It was a literal headhunting frenzy. Her value in the eyes of the elite had skyrocketed in an instant, leaving her caught in the middle of a high-stakes tug-of-war between the city's most powerful families. The recruiter leans in, his voice smooth as he offers the young girl a chance to leave her current life behind and work elsewhere, promising a better position. She meets his gaze with unexpected firmness, her voice clear as she apologizes and states that she has no intention of abandoning her current master. This refusal sparks an immediate, heated reaction from the more aggressive noble nearby, who scoffs at her choice. He insists that serving a merchant is beneath her and that she should join a noble house while the opportunity remains. Despite the pressure, she remains steadfast, acknowledging the honor of their offer but reiterating her decision. The recruiter can only stare in disbelief at the girl's unwavering loyalty. Her resolve hardens as she explains that no amount of gold could ever entice her to betray the one she serves, making her stance undeniably clear. Seeing that her mind is made up, the men finally concede, though they question the wisdom of trusting someone so stubbornly loyal. She bows deeply as they prepare to depart, returning the gifts they had brought as a gesture of finality. As they walk away, they mutter amongst themselves, impressed despite their frustration. They remark that, even for a commoner, her sense of duty is commendable and should be valued. Left alone, she feels a wave of confusion wash over her. She hadn't expected her refusal to be met with such strange praise, wondering why her standing seemed to rise in their eyes because of it. Later, she sits across from Varsal at a table laden with a hearty meal. He notes with a knowing smile that it is only natural for her reputation to grow after such a display of character. He lets out a robust laugh, explaining that in the cutthroat world of royal succession, where betrayal is as common as a daily meal, finding someone with genuine loyalty is a rare and precious thing. He continues the conversation with his associates, reminiscing about his brother's boisterous nature and how he was always a handful to manage. Luke observes that Frim likely finds such a large, imposing figure quite overwhelming, noting that her small stature makes the contrast even more stark. Turning his attention to the young girl as she eats, he announces that he has what he considers to be excellent news. He informs her that the intruders who had caused such a stir, including the young man she encountered, have been apprehended and summarily executed. The revelation hits her like a physical blow, causing her to freeze in place. A single, confused question hangs in the air as she struggles to process the finality of his words. Her face drains of all color as the reality of the situation sinks in. She can only whisper the words dead and executed in disbelief, her wide eyes reflecting a sudden, deep-seated horror that Varsal immediately notices, prompting him to ask about her sudden change in demeanor. Overwhelmed by a wave of nausea and grief, she quickly excuses herself, bowing low to hide her trembling features. She manages to stammer out a plea to be dismissed for the day, unable to remain in the room a moment longer. Once alone, she leans heavily against a wooden barrel, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she thinks of the young man. He was barely 20, a youth with his whole life ahead of him, now snuffed out because of the event she was part of. Sinking to the floor in despair, she is haunted by the possibility that her own testimony sealed his fate. She realizes with a chilling clarity that the moral compass of her previous life is utterly useless in this harsh, unforgiving world where a single word can lead to a death sentence. He eventually finds her outside, his voice breaking through her spiral of guilt as he calls out her name. She looks up at him, her eyes still clouded with the shock of the news, her small frame appearing even more fragile against the backdrop of the stone walls. He attempts to offer a form of comfort, telling her that the immediate danger has passed, yet he warns her to remain vigilant. He explains that while many were caught, the threat is rarely entirely extinguished in her world, leaving her to grapple with the heavy price of her safety. He observes her closely, noting the heavy toll the recent events have taken on her spirit. She can barely meet his gaze, her eyes downcast as she offers a quiet, hesitant confirmation. She looks up as he changes the subject, informing her that the head chef has been asking for her assistance with cleaning the kitchen once more. The mention of a mundane task momentarily pulls her from her dark thoughts. He apologizes for the constant demands placed upon her, explaining that he has urged his superiors to moderate their requests, yet she quickly dismisses his concern. She insists that the work is a welcome distraction, as keeping busy prevents her mind from wandering back to the grim reality of the executions. He watches her with a somber expression, acknowledging her coping mechanism with a quiet, knowing sigh. Frim listens as the kitchen worker apologizes for her back pain, which she admits she brought on herself. Frim looks around the well-equipped kitchen, noting the various utensils hanging on the wall and the professional atmosphere of the room. She watches as the woman serves a plate, explaining that ever since she injured her back, she's been using high-pressure cleaning in the kitchen and serving these special steaks. Frim smiles, confirming that the meal was truly excellent. She then turns her attention to a basket of unfamiliar vegetables, prompting the woman to ask if something is wrong. Frim admits she's curious about the ingredients she hasn't seen before, leading the woman to suggest she try her hand at cooking. She looks uncertain, but the young chef nearby encourages her, explaining that they are the only ones in the kitchen and he's been told to look after her. He adds with a warm smile that cooking is a joy and she should feel free to experiment. She finally nods, agreeing to use the kitchen for a while. The chef tells her to feel free to use any ingredients she finds before mentioning he's going to rest for a bit, leaving her to her own devices. She stands alone now, reflecting on the kindness shown to her and wondering if she caused them unnecessary concern. Her expression shifts to one of quiet focus as she prepares to begin her culinary task. She acknowledges how strange it is that the chef didn't even warn her about the dangers of using knives or fire, despite her young appearance. With a determined look, she decides to see what she can create now that she has the run of the place. She decides that a sandwich is the most practical choice given the bread available and begins by thoroughly washing the fresh, crisp greens. She appreciates the vibrant texture of the leaves as she works, noting their high quality. She examines the protein and dairy, noting the pre-sliced meat and the somewhat mild cheese. She realizes that while the ingredients are good, the dish needs a proper sauce to prevent the flavors from being too direct and simple. She spots a basket of eggs and some vinegar, and a new idea takes shape. Finding some large, heavy chunks of rock salt, she considers how these simple elements might be combined into something more complex, like a homemade mayonnaise. She carefully combines the egg, salt, and vinegar in a bowl, beginning the delicate process of whisking in the oil drop by drop. To speed up the emulsification, she calls upon her magic, commanding the water elements to swirl the ingredients together with incredible speed. She watches with satisfaction as the liquid transforms into a thick, creamy white sauce, a perfect recreation of the mayonnaise from her previous life. Her culinary success draws the attention of the kitchen staff, with the head chef and his assistant approaching to inspect the strange, pale substance she has produced. She introduces the mixture as mayonnaise, explaining that it is a versatile condiment designed to enhance the flavor of other foods rather than being a dish on its own. Before she can offer a proper serving suggestion, the head chef impulsively takes a large taste of the raw sauce directly from a bowl. The chef stands frozen for a moment, his eyes wide with disbelief at the complex and sophisticated flavor profile he has just encountered. She quickly clarifies that the sauce is best enjoyed when paired with fresh vegetables or savory meats to balance its richness. He wastes no time in testing her theory, spreading a generous layer of the sauce onto a sandwich and taking a massive, eager bite. He is instantly overcome with emotion, tears streaming down his face as he praises the perfect harmony of the mellow richness and the refreshing tang of the vinegar. He beamed with gratitude, thanking her for the meal and suggesting that everyone would surely love it. He asked if she would be willing to teach them how to make it later, or if it was a secret recipe, to which she readily agreed to share her knowledge. After their warm exchange, she bid the kitchen staff farewell, her heart lightened by their kindness. As she walked through the quiet, moonlit corridors of the mansion, she reflected on how quickly the day had passed, realizing that her departure was scheduled for the very next morning. Elsewhere in the estate, the young boy from the garden pleaded desperately with the master of the house, begging for just a little more time to finish his tasks. Despite his earnest cries, the nobleman remained unmoved, his expression stern as he prepared to depart. He turned his attention to his advisors, discussing the complexities of the current political situation and the additional work that had been thrust upon them. They debated the necessity of their presence, noting that the Red Dragon Knights were expected to pass through the capital soon, which complicated their plans. The strategist listened intently, his brow furrowed as he considered the implications of their orders. He questioned whether following the master's lead was truly the best course of action, his gaze shifting toward the young girl who had become an unexpected factor in their delicate games of power. Standing nearby, the silent giant remained a stoic observer to the unfolding discussions. The news that their duties had been extended weighed heavily in the air, a reminder of the relentless demands placed upon those who served the high-ranking nobility. He gazed out at the gathering forces, contemplating the strategic importance of the Red Dragon Knight's arrival. The decision to keep certain areas of the royal palace uncleaned was a calculated political move, intended to avoid any misunderstandings regarding their budget or hospitality during this sensitive time. Back in her guest quarters, she lay in bed, her mind racing with thoughts of the friends she had left behind. Though she was safe for now, a deep longing to see them again tugged at her heart, making sleep feel like a distant prospect. Suddenly, she bolted upright, her breath catching as she sensed a presence in the dark room. A terrifying, familiar face loomed over her, its eyes filled with a murderous intent that froze the blood in her veins, until she realized with a gasp of relief that it was only a nightmare. The young man sprints through the winding stone passages of the palace, his footsteps echoing against the heavy masonry as he hurries toward his destination. He pauses for a moment to catch his breath, his face flushed and damp with perspiration as he leans heavily against the rough, cold wall of the corridor. An elderly advisor, his face etched with the wisdom of many years and a gentle, knowing smile, suggests that the internal turmoil the youth is experiencing might simply be the stirrings of first love. He is taken aback by the blunt suggestion, but the elder persists, remarking that it is only natural for a young prince to eventually discover the weight of such complex emotions as he matures. Their conversation turns toward more mystical possibilities as the elder considers if the boy's strange sensations are instead a form of spiritual resonance, advising him to look deeper into his own history and the spirits that might be watching over him. Accepting the advice, the prince closes his eyes and calls upon a woman named Lula, requesting that she reveal the hidden memories she has guarded since the time of his birth. A vision flickers to life, showing a tender moment where a hand rests gently upon a swollen, pregnant belly, a memory of the peace that followed the forging of a contract with a powerful spirit. He recalls a couple who were masters of water magic. They had served as his personal guardians since his infancy, and to him, they were as dear and trusted as an older brother and sister. He remembers how they frequently took him out to play, a bond formed because they were deeply indebted to his mother, who had been saved from a deadly poison by the very spirit whose protection she then sought for her son, though the nature of such a ritual remained uncertain. Despite the shadows surrounding his own spirit and the ambiguity of the ritual that bound them, he stands resolute, accepting the heavy responsibility of his lineage and the duty he owes to the memory of his parents. He listens intently as Luke reflects on the tragic history of the Waterhouse, expressing profound shock that anyone could have survived the catastrophe that was thought to have wiped them out entirely. With a confident and slightly mischievous smile, he admits that he is looking forward to seeing the look of pure astonishment on their faces when they finally meet again. Later that night, as he sleeps soundly in the safety of his chambers, a dark and menacing silhouette suddenly looms over his bed, casting a long shadow across the room. Suddenly, a monstrous, wolf-like figure lunges from the darkness, its claws bared in a lethal strike that jolts him awake in a state of pure terror. He barely manages to roll away from the deadly blow, realizing with a start that an assassin has infiltrated his sanctuary. He knows that if Lula hadn't intervened to wake him, he would already be dead. Gasping for air as a strange sensation washes over him, he realizes that poison has been introduced into the fray, even as he struggles to keep his eyes on the shadowy attacker. From the doorway, a woman dressed in a maid's uniform appears, her voice cold and commanding as she berates the intruder for failing to finish the job quickly. He stares at her in disbelief, his mind racing as he wonders if the beast before him is a magical transformation or if the maid herself is the mastermind behind this betrayal. Before he can find his footing, she strikes with lethal intent, launching a projectile that forces him to scramble backward in a desperate attempt to survive. She follows up the attack by hurling a glass vial that shatters violently against the floor, her face a mask of cold, unwavering determination to see him dead. The young prince leans against a wall, breath hitching as the shouts of guards echo through the corridors. They are searching for him, their voices sharp with urgency as they demand to know where he has fled. Pressing a hand over his mouth to stifle his breathing, he huddles in the shadows. He can't believe his own uncle would go this far, driven by a desperate, twisted hunger for the crown. This struggle for the throne has already claimed so much, fueled by the greed of nobles and the interference of foreign powers. Even the spirits have been dragged into the fray, leaving everyone in a state of misery. He still can't understand why the burden of kingship fell upon him, of all people. Looking toward the unseen presence of his companion, he asks Lula what kind of spirit she truly is. He knows the history. This land was built on the bond between humans and spirits, a connection that has shaped their world for generations. The role of a king is not defined by character or magical strength, but by the blessing of a specific royal spirit. He is meant to be the sole bridge, the one who facilitates the union between the spiritual realm and the people. Everything changed the day his father suddenly collapsed from illness. In the ensuing chaos, he was ushered away and confined, told that he must stay hidden to avoid being swept up in the brothers' violent feud. Gripping the cold, iron bars of his cell, he cries out against the absurdity of it all. He pleads with them, reminding them that they are brothers who have always been close, questioning why they must fight now. His captor looks back with a cold, detached gaze, informing him that someone will be along to tend to his needs. He is told not to worry about his meals, as if that could satisfy the hunger for freedom. As the footsteps fade and the door is left locked, the prince is left alone with his despair. He reaches out through the bars, a raw, agonized scream tearing from his throat as the weight of his isolation finally breaks him. He leaned heavily against the cold stone wall, his mind racing with the weight of a crown he never sought. In the depths of that darkness, the throne had been thrust upon him, dragging him into a cycle of violence he desperately wanted to avoid. Moving through the dim corridor, he reflected on the bitter cost of ambition. The factional infighting had already claimed his brothers, and he felt nothing but contempt for the spirits and the power struggles that had torn his family apart. His expression hardened as the internal declaration echoed in his mind. He had never wanted to be king. Suddenly, a wave of nausea hit him, and he clutched his throbbing head as the realization dawned that his uncle had finally made his move with poison. Desperate to escape the suffocating walls before his strength failed, he spotted a small opening that might lead to safety. He hauled himself through the narrow gap, his muscles straining against the lethargy spreading through his limbs. Emerging into a cramped, dusty space that looked like a storage closet, he paused to catch his breath. He reasoned that he needed to get out of there quickly, but his body was becoming increasingly difficult to control. The moment he pushed open the door to leave, he froze. A hooded figure stood waiting in the hallway, a sinister light glowing in her hand as she calmly stated her mission to end his life, claiming his head for her master's. He scrambled back into the room, his heart hammering against his ribs as he realized he was cornered. Every shadow seemed to hide a new threat, and he desperately sought a way to defend himself despite his weakened state. In the corner of the room, he was stunned to find a young girl, Frim, fast asleep and oblivious to the danger. His shock was cut short as the assassin lunged into the room, her blade gleaming in the dim light. He threw himself forward to shield the sleeping girl, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he struggled to hold back the assassin's relentless assault. Calling out in desperation, he fought to keep his focus even as the poison threatened to overwhelm him. He slumps against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the poison takes hold. His vision blurs, and he struggles to maintain consciousness, cursing the situation as he looks over at the fallen assassin. As his strength fades, he notices a small figure sitting up in the bed nearby. It's Frim, her eyes wide with confusion and fear as she stares at the wounded man in her room. He wonders if she's a ghost or if he's hallucinating. A violent coughing fit racks his body, forcing him to double over. Hearing the commotion, she quickly scrambles out of bed, her voice small but urgent as she responds to his presence. She approaches him tentatively, her hands clasped in front of her as she asks if he's a ghost seeking revenge. He can only stare back, wondering if she's still lost in a dream, before weakly asking where they are within the palace. Despite her fear, she realizes he is gravely injured and offers him water, though he warns her that he's been poisoned and needs to stay hidden. She insists on checking his wound, tearing a piece of fabric to use as a bandage while he apologizes for the intrusion. The pain is sharp as she begins to clean the deep gash on his arm. and he bites down on a handkerchief to keep from crying out. She works with focused determination, knowing that the wound must be kept clean to prevent further infection. Taking a deep breath, she slaps her cheeks to steady her nerves and clear her head. She tells herself that she can do this, finding the resolve needed to face the crisis. Looking down at the man who risked everything to protect her, she understands the gravity of the situation. Though she doesn't fully comprehend what is happening, she knows that she's the only one who can save his life. The young girl looks down at the boy collapsed on the floor, his breathing heavy and labored as he clutches his side in agony. She bites her lip, her mind racing with uncertainty before firm resolve takes hold. She cannot simply stand by while he suffers, regardless of the consequences. Reaching out, she commands the element of water to manifest, shouting for it to wash away the filth from his open wound as he groans in pain. As the cool liquid flows, she urges him to endure the stinging sensation, recalling a distant memory from her past life about how vital it is to cleanse a deep cut from a rusty object to prevent a deadly infection. She explains that she is reducing the poison in his system, her focus absolute as she applies her modern knowledge to this medieval crisis. Despite the nagging doubt that this youth might be a criminal or a fugitive scheduled for execution, she decides that her conscience will not allow her to abandon a soul in such desperate need. She wonders if helping him is the right path, but the sight of his suffering outweighs any political or legal concerns. Suddenly, a sharp sound from the doorway breaks her concentration, and she whips around, her eyes wide with alarm as she senses an approaching threat. The intruder, a woman clad in a maid's uniform but possessing a cold, murderous gaze, demands to know what has become of the boy, her presence radiating a lethal intent that fills the small room. From the shadows of the hallway, the woman stares back with an icy intensity, questioning the girl's intentions and warning her to step aside if she values her life. She makes it clear that the boy is her target and anyone in her way is an obstacle to be removed. Refusing to back down, the small girl stands her ground against the looming threat, her hands beginning to glow with the power of her burgeoning magic as she prepares to defend the helpless boy. With a fierce cry, she unleashes a blinding torrent of water, the sheer force of the blast illuminating the dark room as she strikes out to protect her charge from the assassin. She stands her ground as the hooded figure looms, his voice cold as he demands she surrender the boy. He offers a final warning, promising no harm if she complies, but his presence radiates a lethal intent that belies his words. Because of this threat, she hesitates, her mind racing through the grim possibilities. She knows that surrendering the boy offers no safety for herself, especially after the ruthless intent she felt from the whip earlier. The assassin, losing patience, commands her to step aside immediately. Suddenly, a violent burst of energy erupts, catching the assailant directly in the face. The force of the impact is sudden and jarring, momentarily halting his advance in a flash of light and heat. Panicked by the intensity of her own power, she watches the smoke rise, her breath hitching as she realizes the gravity of what she's done. She tells herself she had no choice. It was her life or his, but the fear of having taken a life remains etched on her face. However, the threat is far from over as the man surges through the smoke, his face twisted in a snarl of rage. He lunges at her with renewed ferocity, his voice a low growl as he declares his intent to end her life right then and there. In response, she scrambles to gather her mana, the air around her shimmering with the effort. The speed of his attack is overwhelming, forcing her to rely on pure instinct as she prepares a desperate countermeasure. With a sharp cry, she commands the energy to release, thrusting her hands forward to repel the oncoming shadow. The magical discharge is blinding, a desperate wall of force meant to keep the killer at bay. The blast connects with a sickening thud, sending the assassin reeling backward. He cries out in agony, his composure shattered by the raw, untamed power of the young girl's magic. As the dust begins to settle, he collapses onto the stone floor, his body smoking from the magical impact. She remains where she is, her chest heaving as she tries to process the fact that she is still alive. He stares up at her, his expression a mix of disbelief and burgeoning fear, unable to comprehend how a mere child could possess such strength. She can only stare back, her eyes wide and her breath coming in ragged gasps, the silence of the courtyard heavy between them. Frim lunges forward, her breath hitching as she reaches out with a desperate hand. In response, the cloaked woman gathers a swirling mass of magical energy in her palm, her face twisted in a cold sneer. She demands to know why Frim would go so far for such a man, claiming the country has suffered enough under the rule of a foolish king who has lost everything. Hearing this, the young girl turns her gaze toward the unconscious boy on the floor, the weight of his true identity finally sinking in. The assassin continues her tirade, her voice rising in anger as she questions why anyone would choose to protect a monster. She demands that the boy be handed over immediately, insisting that a villain of his caliber has no right to draw breath. But Frim remains steadfast, admitting she knows nothing of his past crimes. As the tension thickens, she reflects on her time in this world, realizing how often she has looked away from the suffering and complexity around her. With a sudden burst of conviction, She cries out that if he is guilty, he should live to face his punishment, refusing to carry the burden of another regret by abandoning him now. A dark thought flickers through her mind, imagining the boy's demise and wondering if the world might truly be better off without such a person. Looking down at his vulnerable form, she ultimately rejects the path of silence, knowing that allowing him to be murdered would haunt her for the rest of her days. She stands with unwavering resolve, her voice ringing out with a promise that she will never abandon the boy, regardless of his past or the titles he might hold. Her eyes, wide and filled with a fierce determination, reflect a soul that has found a purpose worth fighting for. She watches as the hooded man's expression softens for a fleeting moment, his voice tinged with a weary empathy as he admits that he once had a daughter much like her. He confesses a reluctance to harm someone so young, yet the shadow of his duty remains heavy upon his brow. He offers a final, somber apology, explaining that he too has burdens he must carry and people he must protect. With a sharp intake of breath, he casts aside his hesitation and prepares to unleash his full strength against the girl who stands in his way. He lashes out with a violent whip-like strike of energy that tears through the air, forcing her to react instantly. She conjures a swirling sphere of water to intercept the blow, the impact creating a deafening crack as the two forces collide in a spray of mist. She feels the immense pressure of the attack vibrating through her entire body, her water barrier beginning to fracture under the relentless force. A cold realization dawns on her. This weapon is far more dangerous than she anticipated, and her current defenses are reaching their breaking point. She grit her teeth and refuses to yield, even as the man roars for her to move aside, his frustration mounting. Despite her mana reserves dwindling and the physical strain showing on her face, she pushes back against the onslaught with everything she has left. She is suddenly thrown backward as the ground beneath her seems to give way, the sheer momentum of the struggle sending her tumbling through the air. The hooded knight lunges forward, believing he has finally found the opening he needed to end the confrontation. She lands hard on the wet stone, but a sharp, knowing smile touches her lips as she looks up at her opponent. The man's confident stride falters as his feet lose their grip, his eyes widening in shock as he realizes the ground has become a treacherous, frictionless trap. She reveals her tactical masterstroke. While defending, she had been subtly saturating the entire area with water, turning the battlefield into a slick surface he cannot navigate. He stares at her in disbelief, stunned that a mere child could orchestrate such a calculated maneuver in the heat of battle. She seizes the moment of his vulnerability, thrusting her hands forward to command the very water that tripped him. A massive, spiraling torrent erupts from the ground, engulfing the knight in a powerful surge that sweeps him off his feet and sends him crashing away. She unleashes the full force of her magic, sending the knight flying backward with a powerful surge. He can only cry out in shock as the torrent overwhelms him, while she grits her teeth, hoping this final effort will be enough to end the confrontation. While she catches her breath, the knight lies broken and defeated on the ground as a second hooded figure emerges from the shadows. The newcomer casually remarks that the other area has been cleared and mocks his fallen comrade for struggling against a mere child. He coughs painfully in response to the newcomer's mockery, warning his partner to stay alert because the girl possesses terrifyingly powerful water magic. She stares at them, her breath hitching as the realization sinks in. The number of assassins has grown, and her situation has become truly dire. Frim stood, trembling in the dark woods, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she realized her magic and physical strength had finally hit their absolute limit. Surrounded by the encroaching shadows of new pursuers, she felt the weight of despair, wondering if this was where her journey would end. Seeing her struggle, the weary knight standing beside her made a startling proposal, demanding that she hand him over to their enemies to save herself. She could only stare at him in stunned silence, her eyes wide with disbelief at his sudden willingness to sacrifice himself. He was in no condition to fight, his leg heavily bandaged and his face etched with the strain of his injuries. Despite his weakened state, a grim resolve burned in his eyes as he leaned heavily on his makeshift staff, prepared to face the end on his own terms. From the safety of the tree-line, a hooded figure watched the exchange with cold interest, noting that the source of their troubles had finally revealed himself. The silhouette of the assassin loomed large against the distant, flickering light of a burning structure. The assassins closed in, their voices dripping with malice as they taunted the knight, questioning why someone of his stature, who should have been king, was reduced to this. They barked orders for Frim to stay back, declaring that for the sake of the country, he had to die. Ignoring their threats, the man turned to the young girl with a surprisingly gentle smile, his expression softening as he told her she had done a wonderful job. It was a final, quiet acknowledgement of her efforts before the end. As he prepared to face his fate, she realized with a sinking heart that he fully intended to die in this place. Even knowing his death was certain, he was still trying to find a way for her to escape, while the voices of their pursuers urged him to give up and hand her over. Suddenly, the ground erupted with a violent surge of water. Sharp, the lead assassin clicked his tongue in annoyance, swiftly dodging the magical assault and lunging forward with his blade. Frim watched in terror, her small frame trembling as the reality of the life-or-death struggle intensified, the enemy demanding to know if this was her final answer. Refusing to abandon him, she summoned the last of her strength to manifest a massive sphere of water between them and their attackers. She cried out, her voice cracking with emotion as she questioned how he could suggest leaving him behind when he looked so pale and close to collapse, vowing not to let him go. She stares at the ground, questioning why she's going to such lengths for another. She tells herself that if she didn't possess her knowledge or water magic, she surely would have sought help from someone else, trying to convince herself that this path is the only logical one. Her mind drifts back to a memory of her former life, recalling a day when a child fell on an escalator. She wonders if she would have reached out her hand even if it meant risking her own life, realizing she had always avoided the simple question of why people help one another, dismissing such acts as mere hypocrisy or self-satisfaction. But now, she casts those doubts aside, her voice ringing out with absolute certainty. She declares that when one person helps another, no complex reason is required. It is simply what must be done, a truth she finally accepts as her own. Watching her from across the clearing, the intruders scoff at her display of defiance. One of them notes that while she has the knowledge and the magic to act, he questions if she's prepared for the end, mockingly asking if she's just struggling in vain since he believes her life is already forfeit. Ignoring their taunts, the young girl turns to the wounded youth beside her. She commands him to sit and hold her tightly, insisting that he must not move no matter what happens next, as she prepares to unleash everything she has. He looks at her, seeing the unwavering resolve in her eyes that contrasts with her small frame. With a soft, resigned breath, he simply says he understands, placing his trust entirely in her hands as he pulls her close. While he braces himself, the assassin lunges forward with a roar, demanding to know if they're truly prepared for death. In response, a colossal sphere of water begins to swirl violently around the pair, acting as both a shield and a gathering storm of immense power. His blade strikes the magical barrier, and the young girl shouts for her companion to brace for the impact. A blinding flash erupts from the point of contact, drowning out the assassin's cry of surprise as the water magic reacts violently to the intrusion. The resulting energy detonates in a massive, radiant explosion that tears through the surrounding forest. It is a testament to the sheer scale of the power she has unleashed, far exceeding anything she had attempted before. The shockwave ripples outward, a pillar of light and water surging toward the heavens as the very earth trembles. The clearing is consumed by the brilliance of her magic, leaving the fate of both the defenders and their attackers hanging in the balance. She is hurled through the air, a mere leaf caught in the wake of the titanic magical discharge she just unleashed. The thunderous boom of the explosion rolls across the grounds, instantly shattering the silence of the night and alerting the entire estate. From the shadows of the mansion, staff members and guards rush toward the source of the disturbance, their voices filled with panic. One man shouts over the ringing in his ears about the terrifying sound, while another cries out that they've found someone injured. The realization ripples through the group as a voice confirms that His Majesty has finally been found, and they desperately urge one another to hurry to the site of the devastation. The young girl stands in a clean, modern kitchen, watching the woman she once knew as her mother in another life. She watches as the woman checks a glowing device and prepares a meal with practiced ease. This memory shifts to a serene moment where they sat together as a family, surrounded by the blue depths of a vast aquarium. The dream shatters as she calls out for her mother, her eyes snapping open to a reality far removed from that peaceful past. Waking with a sharp wince of pain, she finds herself tucked into a soft bed just as a maid enters the room, startled to see her conscious. While the servant rushes off to find help, the girl lies back, her mind racing with the realization that she pushed her magical reserves far beyond their limits. She vividly recalls the moment of the blast, when she desperately wove a multi-layered water barrier, strategically placing layers of oxygen and hydrogen to shield them. As these memories fade, the young man she protected limps into the room, his own body wrapped in bandages as he urges her to remain still and recover. He approaches her bedside with a look of profound gratitude, thanking her for saving his life, though she can only offer a weak apology as her legs fail her when she tries to rise. Seeing her struggle, he offers a gentle smile, declaring that all her past slights are forgiven and that her only duty now is to rest. He admits there was a significant misunderstanding regarding the execution she had heard about, taking personal responsibility for the confusion that had clouded her mind. Seeing her bewilderment, he leans in closer and asks a pointed, unexpected question about the identity of her parents. She is left stunned by the inquiry, the silence in the room growing heavy as she stares back at him from her bed, unable to find words. He then formally introduces himself as Chartel Venoaria Luna Oberos, the king of the realm, and the very person whose life she saved during the attack. Continuing his explanation, he speaks of a trusted guard couple he once knew who had a child to whom he had personally granted protection and name. As she processes this revelation, he points to her distinct, pale hair color as the undeniable proof of her true lineage. With a steady, authoritative gaze, he finally speaks the name that truly belongs to her, Flammis Tanarim Lucalim. Overwhelmed by the weight of this new identity, she pleads to simply return to her old life at the mansion, but he gently questions if such a return is even possible now that the truth is out. She demands to know what any of this history has to do with the circumstances of her birth and why it matters so much to him. He concludes by revealing that the Lucalim family is a prestigious and ancient house, renowned throughout the land for their absolute mastery over the element of water. He continued his explanation, his voice grave as he revealed the complicated political web surrounding her lineage. He explained that the Lucalim house was currently under the thumb of his own uncle, a man who staunchly supported the former king's brother, Lyarm. The weight of his words hung heavy in the room as he concluded that her family was effectively part of the faction that had dispatched assassins to take his life. Stunned, she could only stare at him, the realization dawning that her own bloodline was now branded as an enemy of the crown. Frim is stunned by the revelation that the king's uncle was involved in the attack and that her own family might be connected. The young king, still recovering, looks at her with a mix of urgency and concern as he delivers the news. He doesn't give her much time to process the information, grabbing her hand and insisting she follow him immediately, despite his own weakened state. As they enter a private chamber, a maid suddenly lunges forward, pulling the girl into a crushing, emotional embrace that catches her completely off guard. She is nearly smothered by the woman's intense display of affection, as the maid tearfully expresses her profound relief that the child is still among the living. The woman holds her tightly, her face buried in the girl's shoulder, while the child remains frozen, unsure how to react to such a sudden and overwhelming outpouring of emotion. Over the following days, this devoted caretaker, known as Eel, remains inseparable from her charge. She attends to every detail of the girl's life, from carefully preparing her meals to assisting with her baths, providing a level of dedicated service that borders on the obsessive. From the doorway, the king watches the process in silence, his gaze fixed on the child as she slowly begins to recover under such constant supervision. Meanwhile, he seeks the counsel of a specialized healer to delve into the mysteries of the girl's physiology. The healer explains that despite their best efforts, the standard light-based restorative magic that usually mends the body is having almost no effect on her. They speculate that some internal influence or a conflicting magical affinity might be preventing the light from taking hold, leaving her recovery to progress at a natural, albeit slow, pace. He later confronts her directly in a quiet moment, asking if she has ever felt fundamentally different from those around her or if she possesses any unusual traits. She considers the question before admitting that she has always had a remarkably strong affinity for water magic, a talent she has relied on in the past. He listens intently, his expression unreadable as he processes this information alongside the healer's findings. Their discussion takes a darker turn as he mentions the possibility of her possessing the protection of the dark attribute, a rare and often misunderstood phenomenon. This revelation strikes a chord of fear within her, as she anxiously asks if such a connection to the darkness makes her dangerous or a threat to those around her. He doesn't offer an immediate reassurance, leaving the weight of the possibility hanging in the air. She is eventually left alone with her unsettling thoughts, reflecting on ancient records that speak of such dark protections. A chilling realization begins to dawn on her as she considers her recent experiences. She has started to see the lingering spirits of the deceased in places where the living should be alone, a sign that her connection to the other side is far deeper than she ever imagined. She contemplates the strange reality of her existence, wondering if the researcher from her past life and her current self have truly merged into a single soul. The king stands before her, his expression grave as he speaks of the days to come, urging her to consider her future with the utmost care. He bids her a quiet good night, reminding her that for now, her only duty is to rest and allow her body to heal without further strain. Once he departs, the young girl is left to her thoughts, reflecting on the dangerous political web she is caught in. She knows her own family supports the king's enemies and likely views her as a nuisance to be eliminated. She weighs her grim options, returning to the criminal underworld, facing certain death at the hands of the Lucalims, seeking protection from her new allies, or simply vanishing into a journey of her own. The following morning, a staggering pile of tributes is brought into the room, as the maid explains that these are gifts from nobles eager to curry favor with the girl who saved the crown. She speaks with infectious enthusiasm, recounting how the girl's bravery in saving the king and exposing the traitor has made her a celebrated figure throughout the palace, even among the kitchen staff. She continues to list the wild rumors circulating among the staff, including the belief that the girl is a legendary sage capable of mastering all 4 great magics, a notion that leaves the child visibly unsettled. She mentions even more fantastical tales of spirits and divine connections, leaving the young girl sweating under the pressure of such impossible expectations and the weight of her new public identity.